Welcome, everybody. Good to see you, Dave.
Thank you,
Jane.
Mr. Chairman.
Yeah. So we have the Board of Equalization, Agency 211. Are we up and running yet? We are up and running. So please proceed.
Well, I can tell you everything you want to know about the Board of Equalization or just a little bit about the Board of Equalization. First off, just to familiarize you, we are the State Board of Equalization. We have 2 staff and 3 board members. We do have 2 constitutional responsibilities and statutory responsibilities. The constitutional responsibility is really the equalization aspect and to ensure the uniformity and the equality of our state tax system. And then the appeals process is the more statutory. We work very closely with the Department of Revenue, primarily the Property Tax Division, and also with the 23 county assessors. And we are responsible for sort of overseeing their work. We have our statistician who works all year round creating Excel spreadsheets that I understand in concept, but wouldn't be able to repeat if my life depended on it. But he works with the assessors and creates a spreadsheet that they run through their systems and then give us an idea of how the state's tax structure, what the uniformity is. We've, in the last couple of years, have eliminated 2 staff positions, which out of 4 is a lot. The first staff position was the executive assistant. We combined that with our attorney position, and then our attorney retired 2 years ago. And while we spent the first few months of the year with 3,000 applications and no one qualified for the job, the cuts hit and we eliminated the position. And so the 2 attorney members of the board are now acting as the attorneys for the board and also the hearing officer for the board. And then we had an executive assistant who is taking rush paralegal classes because she's taken over the position of working with the public, because the members of the board can't directly work with the public. We can't talk to them about their cases. We can't tell them what direction they're going. So what happens is we have an assistant who talks to the person. They come talk to one of the lawyers. The lawyer gives her an answer, and then she calls back the taxpayer and tells them, it's kind of like a telephone tree. And it's worked really pretty well. I mean, it's probably slowed things down a little bit for the taxpayers in the state, especially the people that aren't represented by attorneys, by the laymen, the self-represented people, but it has worked. But consequently, that cut our budget pretty significantly. And then as you can look at our budget between the last biennium and the last supplemental budget through the COVID cuts, we've cut our operating budget by half. And that's quite a bit for us. I mean, it's starting to be into the paper and the paper clips. It's a good thing when they tore down that Herscher building, I stole every paper clip in the state and file folder. So we're pretty much set, but we're not asking for any additional money. We've cut out our travel. We, as a rule, I think for the attorneys especially, they can get CLE credits online and also through the Attorney General's office when they're offered. We used to go to a tax conference once a year with all the other states, paid for by the conference. We had to pay for our airplanes, but they paid for all the room and board and the whole conference. But we've eliminated that, and then a COVID came and they eliminated it too. So that worked out pretty well for us. But in the future, I would hope someday we could add a little bit more in there to let the newer members of the board go. So it's the next point. We are going to start turning over board members. All of us are up and out within 25, 20, 25, 20, 23, 25, and 27. Our terms are up. So the governor in the last few positions, the last 3 times, 4 times he's filled a position, is pulled out of the top of the AG's office. Dave Delacath, whom I forgot to introduce, is State Board member Dave Delacath. Dave and Marty both came from this. Marty was the director of the Civil Division. Dave was director of the Criminal Division. Before that, our board member was Robin Cooley, who was director of the Health Division, and Dave Groover, who worked at LSO somehow. Anyway, those were the other 4 board members, and they were all very high level. And our concern is that going forward, you'll have to try to find that same caliber and convince them to come to the board and make less. So that's something we've talked to the governor about. And I think it's just something you'll need to keep in mind as you go forward, as we all start retiring. And with that, I can tell you that that's kind of what our budget does. It pays the majority, obviously, is salaries, benefits, and then we have a $50,000 operating budget for everything else. And the biggest expense is Westlaw. And, that is the biggest expense in our budget is the Westlaw. We've gone back and renegotiated it, which we signed for effective next year. And I've cut we've cut 2 of our licenses. And because I don't need it because I don't do Westlaw searches as much. So that'll save us $150 a month. So it adds up. So that's, we pretty much trimmed everything we can out of here, I think. So if you want more specifics, I'd love to answer them. Otherwise, it's a pretty much exactly what you had last year when you did all the COVID cuts and the budget cuts.
So Jane, it might be useful if you could just prepare and submit to us a little outline of kind of what we call them one-pagers that has your compensation, your staff time, your workload, how much time you actually spend during the hearings, that type of thing. So in order to address the issue of adequate communication, we need a big picture and then break it down to kind of the details for the individual positions and members, so we can understand that fully.
How we're doing it. So taking the first aspect of our position, which is the equalization component, our statistician spends probably 85% of his time crunching all the numbers and creating the spreadsheets that works with the Department of Revenue and the assessors. And then when those numbers start coming in, when the taxes are assessed in January, he works with all of them to bring that through. So that's about 85% of his time. When we eliminated the executive secretary function, he picked up all of the technology stuff. So the rest of it is he now has to stop his work when we have a hearing that isn't done with a court reporter. And he comes in and takes and tapes all of our hearings and then puts them on the internet. He does all of our web work, all the website maintenance, all of that kind of thing, and works with ETS on all of our computers. We have an executive assistant who used to just be the person that kept us all our docket in place and worked with, certainly took the first calls, worked with, the public when they came in. As I said, she's gone in and taken a paralegal class and she's got the first certification and she's working on the second certification. So her time is probably spent half and half between working on our appeals and working on just the general office. The 3 board members, we spend pretty much May, June, part of July doing equalization abstracts, reviewing the state property taxes. And then the rest of the year is with appeals. The appeals, as you know, are sales and use tax appeals, minerals tax appeals, license revocation, transportation fuel tax appeals, and then local property tax appeals. We have almost no way to tell you how many there will be in a given year because we just don't know. It depends on what the Department of Audit finishes and somebody appeals, which they seem to always appeal. And then we also have the county appeals. Last year was an anomaly, I think, because there were some issues in Natrona County that are being worked out, and that left us, they had 3,000 appeals, and we didn't get all 3,000 of them. So, but there were a significant number of them, which we haven't even finished up yet for this year and we're about to start next year because of the significant number of Natrona County appeals. So it kind of breaks out that there are a couple, 3 months of the year that are entirely set with setting the property tax system, finding the values, and then certifying those values to the schools and to everyone else, to the counties, so that you can send out the money. Last year, for all the doom and gloom, wasn't a bad year here. I think you guys have seen the Craig report. The state's assessed valuation is pretty decent. So, I think there are some benefits to all of that. There were some local counties, I think 5 counties went down in value, but everybody else went up. And some went up rather significantly, and depending on the property. Natrona County's value went up, but their local assessed went down. So, kind of balances out. And some counties like, I think it was Goshen County went up for the first time in its life. And just because people were moving in. And what seemed like to assessors on the ground, a lot of people moving to Wyoming during the COVID. It probably was maybe 2,000 or 3,000 sales statewide. But if you're in a county that has 5 sales like Niobrara or 20 sales like Goshen, or that's probably too little, but to get an additional 10 or 15 sales was a lot to them. And so it seemed like a lot of people. The people in Lander all moved to Thermopolis. So it looked like Thermopolis had a lot of work, but it was truly the people in Lander moving to Thermopolis because the people in Du Bois moved to Lander. And so there was a lot of shuffling as the property values increased so significantly in places like Du Bois and Jackson. So people moved around a little bit. So I guess that kind of tells you what we do. We just, some years we'll have 40 sales tax appeals, some years we'll have 10. Some years we'll have like 20 local assessed tax appeals, and some years we'll get 30. Most of the counties don't have appeals that come to us.
Okay, further questions for Jane? Dave, how you get along? It's going well? Doing great, thank you. Good to see you. All right. I think that will cover it then. Jane.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, guys.
Appreciate it. Okay, we've got the Department of Revenue. Welcome. It's good to see you again, Brenda. Hope you had a good weekend. Go ahead, please proceed.
Good afternoon, Chairman Nicholas, members of the committee, Brenda Henson, Director of the Department of Revenue. And with me today, I have Christy Urich. Christy has been with the agency for 27 years. I think I'm the fifth or sixth director that she has guided through this budget process, and definitely has been a huge benefit for me these past few months. With that, I would like to start with just saying it's my pleasure to present the 2023-24 budget for the Wyoming Department of Revenue. The responsibilities of the agency are vast and diverse, and quite honestly, pretty overwhelming, actually. During my meeting with Governor Gordon in July, his last words to me were, "I hold the director personally responsible for all the responsibilities within the agency." And of course, my response was, "As you should." As I sit here today, I also understand the responsibilities that you have. Taxpayers hold you accountable. They trust that you're going to ensure tax dollars are spent directly tied to the services that they receive. And you have to consider the needs of the present while planning for the future. As our discussion proceeds today, I approach this as a joint effort by which funding ultimately is sufficient for the Department of Revenue to do the statutory functions that the legislature demands of us. I will tell you that for the Department of Revenue, this past year has been full of changes, challenges, and accomplishments. We have a great deal, though, on our horizon. And as I provide an overview of each of the 5 divisions, you'll hear success stories, but you'll also hear opportunities for improvement. So with that, I also want to introduce my administrators, Craig Grenvik with the Mineral Tax Division, Terry Lucero with the Excise Tax Division, Brian Judkins, Property Tax Division, as well as Tom Montoya with the Liquor Division. So with that, if it pleases the committee, I'd like to start on page 4 of the budget. What I anticipate doing is I'll go over the budget just in general, then we'll go to each of the divisions, and I'll address the exception requests as we hit each division, if that's
Sounds
acceptable.
perfect.
Okay. All right, so let's start with page 4. So page 4, you'll see that our standard budget includes $226,473,534. That sounds like a great deal. However, when you consider that 202 million of that is spending authority for the liquor division, and that 202 million consists of 175 million for liquor purchases and 27 million for general fund transfers. We have exception requests this biennium of $123,860,024. But that also includes an additional 100 million for liquor purchases and an additional 15 million for general fund transfers. And when we get to the liquor division, I'll delve into that a little more. I do want to note that Governor Gordon did recommend all of our exception requests. We did appreciate that. Interestingly enough, of the remaining 33,333,558, 20 million plus is 100 series personnel costs. In addition to that, we've got 1.1 million in our budget for temporary personnel at the liquor division. And when you look at all of that, that's about 64% of the rest of our budget is personnel costs. Then we have transfers to ETS for IT support to the tune of about 600,000. And then we have a direct bill for one position out of the liquor division for an IT person. That's an additional 231,000 that totals up a little over $830,000. It goes to ETS. Our total budget request, 350,333,558. And with that, I'll turn to our first division, which is administration. That's on page 18 of the budget. This particular division of the Department of Revenue has been reduced substantially in that there is one full-time position for the next biennium, whose name is Brenda Henson. So we have one position in administration. Historically, our human resource positions, of which we have two, were funded out of this division. We have one exception request in this division, and of course, it's the negative $400,000, and it is the transfer of those two human resources positions to A&I. The only other item on the administration side that I wanted to touch on is page 22, and that refers to our the money we have devoted to the streamlined sales tax membership and participation. So other than that, that is everything that's in that administration division. Any questions for that?
I do have a question, Brenda. And on page 7, you refer to your ability to enforce and tax collections against corporations. And my question is, has that issue been broached to the Revenue Committee? And are they putting together legislation to address it?
Mr. Chairman, the last time that was discussed was 2 years ago, and it was with the Revenue Committee, and there was a discussion between Director Noble and the committee chairs. But to my knowledge, nothing ever came of that. We never saw any draft legislation. So certainly it's something that we need to investigate further.
Why don't you tell us a little bit further about what you think we need to do and what you would like to see?
I think for the most part, Mr. Chairman, the key is if they are behind, and we need some sort of a hammer in that, whether it's the corporation or company that is doing business and not remitting those sales tax dollars. In some instances, the possibility of holding the directors, board members for those companies personally responsible for those taxes. That is something we don't have in Wyoming. There are other states out there, and I couldn't tell you how many, but there's just got to be a way to tie the actual people to the collection of that sales tax revenue. As you know, with sales tax, when it's collected, we do have state board cases out there that basically if it's collected and it was collected in error, where does that money go to? And I think there just needs to be quite a bit of work delving into how do other states do that and what opportunity exists for us to change that.
So I don't know that we disagree with that. I think the first line of the process is to sit, have interim work with your committee to do it. And if that doesn't bear fruit, let us know. But my guess is it would entail the Legislative Services Office going in and doing kind of a deep dive on what happens in other states, what types of situations you have liability, personal liability on a board. I mean, that's a pretty fine line to watch, depending on the type of corporation, what the corporation does, and how far you take that. But to just be better educated on that process. Certainly, what you're not really telling us though is what you think we're missing. I mean, how much revenue, how often do you see things go off tracks and there's nothing you can do about it?
Mr. Chairman, I would appreciate an opportunity to do a little more research on that realm and get back with you.
Okay, that'd be great.
Thank
Okay,
you.
thank you.
With that, any other
Senator
questions?
Greer.
I guess, yeah, that would be my question. I think about it. Senator Steinmetz and I have retail businesses, and we know what happens if we don't pay our sales tax, and it's pretty easy and it's swift, and we know we have to do it. But I guess what I'd wonder is now with online sales, with companies that could just come in and set up in a pop-up sort of way, sell things and then evaporate, and yeah, and how much of that is going on. And I could see where that might be a emerging problem, or you wouldn't really have any way to to go after somebody for not paying taxes, because they could just fold up and go and then pop up in another place. So that might be part of
Sure.
what we're looking for.
And Mr. Chairman, Senator Grew, one of the things that we are challenged with right now on those online sales is that physical situs location in Wyoming. In our application, we ask them, but quite honestly, what we're getting typically is just the agent. They've got an agent in Wyoming, and that's the situs address that they're giving us. But we're working with those companies. Obviously, they've reached out. They want to be licensed. They want to do business in Wyoming. We don't want to, make that a difficult process for them. But it is one of the challenges. And as we continue on down this road of more and more vendors, we'll be looking into that. Thank you for your comment. With that, Mr. Chairman, I'd like to move on to page 26, which is admin services.
Mr. Chairman, going back,
Please
I
go
wasn't
ahead.
sure we had finished that topic. Just on your HR consolidation and the exception request, I know that's already taken place. How is it going? As well as, are the two folks that were assigned to your office, are they still physically located within your office? Just so a little more in depth on that.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Walters, those two positions are still physically within the office. As far as the support that we receive from our human resources staff, I can honestly tell you, we've had a lot of changes in the Department of Revenue this past year. A lot of hiring, replacements, a lot of things that have gone on. And I will tell you that I've had them hopping. Our human resources personnel have handled personnel situations that we've never dealt with. They're telling me that, in the 20+ years that they've been employed by the agency, we're encountering things now that we've never encountered in the past. So I will tell you that it has been a benefit to have a direct line to Erin Williams and to Director Bach in, how are other agencies dealing with these types of things. So I think that communication piece has improved. I get a little leery about, oh my goodness, what if these two individuals are taking on other large agencies, because I'm keeping them pretty busy at this point. But I do know that they're looking at how they're structured and a lot of cross-training. I've always been an advocate for cross-training and getting people exposed to other processes. So my answer to you right now, with the 4 months that I've been working, we're fine. Got a great crew.
Okay, please proceed.
Mr. Chairman, page 26, admin services. That particular agency, division, has 8 full-time employees, a standard budget request of $1,469,889. We do have 2 exception requests totaling 11,986, those being priority 15 and priority 17. Priority 15 is a IT hardware replacement for the staff, 9 PCs at $1,006 per PC. Priority 17 is telecommunications, and you'll see this type of a request also in the excise tax division when we get there. Due to a lot of our meetings and the software development that we've had due to statutory changes, we have had a lot more as far as long distance expense. Although our budget is so tight that we actually had to include it as an exception request just to bump up those. And those are transfers. We get billed from ETS for the telecommunication charges, and then we remit those. But that is what the admin service priority number 17 request is for. As far as the IT hardware replacement, just a standard, we're on a 6-year replacement for the Department of Revenue. Just a little bit of information about admin services. In 2009, we had 11 employees in that division. Today we have 8. The most recent position was eliminated as part of the COVID-19 reductions. That particular position had the primary responsibility of administering the property tax refund program. It has not been funded most recently, and so we were able to give up that position. When we look at the responsibilities of admin services, I think in the future, we may need to discuss the possibility of maybe at least gaining back the 1 position that we lost during the COVID-19 reductions. But I'm not asking for anything at this juncture. We do want to cover a little bit and answer your questions on that property tax refund program. The funding for that is listed in the valuation division, property tax division. So we'll cover a little bit more of that when we get there, if that's acceptable. With that, I'd stand for any questions on admin services. And if there are none, we'll turn to page 30, which is our IT information technologies. Kind of a hold over. As you may recall, we had an IT department within the Department of Revenue that had staff. Today, there are 0 FTEs in the Information Technology Division. It's really a placeholder where we put the funding for our main software vendor that supports our excise tax, mineral tax, and admin services. The standard budget on that division is $421,047. We do have an exception request, 2 exception requests that total $3,267,585. Now it's a little bit deceiving in that our priority 1 exception request for $3,071,768 is our maintenance contract and with managed business systems. Now we have contracted with managed business systems, or MBS, since 2011. We've partnered with them. At that time, we had 5 employees within our agencies that were developers. You may recall in 2012 is when ETS, everything consolidated to ETS. We have been concerned that we knew we were going to lose those in-house positions, even as employees of ETS, because of retirements and those sorts. Well, it happened this year. We're down to 0. We don't have anybody in staff to help support that system. So the MBS contract for 21-22, the current biennium, was $2,812,574. But that was funded through the efficiency funds, this current biennium. And so that's why you see for 23-24, we've got an exception request for a total amount. In addition to providing the maintenance and existing applications for the current biennium, development was necessary to implement legislation related to lodging tax, the optional municipal tax, the mineral monthly ad valorem tax, And we were able to fund the majority of those expanded software with that biennium, that $2.8 million. We are expanding that contract a little bit because of not having any in-house IT staff. So we're going to be more dependent on MBS for support over the next biennium. We do use that system to collect over $2 billion annually for the agency and for the state of Wyoming. Now with the monthly mineral ad valorem tax coming on this next January, we anticipate that that's an additional $500 million that we'll be collecting using that software and distributing to county treasurers. So definitely important within the agency. I did want to mention again that during the 2021 session, Senate File 60, that was the follow-up legislation for the monthly ad valorem payment. There was an appropriation of $274,000 that was within that bill. We were able to fund the expanded monthly ad valorem with the original contract, that $2,800,000. So we will be reverting that $274,000 to the LISRA at the end of the year.
So Brenda, on the MBSS maintenance fee, how much is that per year? And what's the term of that contract? And if you add work to it, I mean, do they bill kind of like on an hourly basis or on a project basis? Or how does that, when you add to it, how does that happen?
Mr. Chairman, that we do a 2-year contract with that. So, approximately 1.5 million per year. Now included in that contract, this current biennium, what we did is we contracted for an additional 4,000 hours of development for legislative changes. I think it was that unknown that the prior director just didn't know for sure where we would be at. When we started in the current biennium, we did have some IT support. By the end of the biennium, we did not. So that was all included, and the hourly, is there an hourly amount that they charge us on the 4,000 hours?
It just depends on the project and what amount of time they're using. They charge per hour.
Okay, any further questions on that? I'm just curious if you have had the opportunity to, obviously we're writing the MBS as our mainstream provider for you. But have you looked at alternatives, have a comparable pricing for comparable services? Do we own the data so that if MBS for some reason doesn't operate properly or whatever, that we won't be in the dark on any type of a reboot, that type of thing?
Mr. Chairman, there has been research historically. It was 2015 that Director Noble reached out to Tax, looked at what a system that would be all-inclusive for the state of Wyoming would be. At that time, it was approximately $5 million per year. That was not a direction that we wanted to go in at that time. I will say that the system itself, we're very fortunate with MBS. While we lost some of our IT support that were employees of ETS, fortunately, MBS picked them up. Actually they employ some of the folks that used to work within our agency, and so they do have that knowledge and expertise. And I will tell you that that saves us money in the long run when you don't have to bring those programmers up to speed on what our business is. I have had discussions with Director Sheehan about possibly getting people physically located back within the agency in the Hirschler building. His ask of me is to put together a couple of PDQs, job descriptions. What exactly would they be responsible for? And he's definitely open to that. And his vision, as explained to me, was that he would hope that those business analysts that work for ETS would have such a knowledge base that they would be able to walk right in and take on a supervisory role if necessary within the agency. So I am appreciative of Director Sheehan's vision. It's not where we are at today, but I definitely believe that after the first of the year that we'll have the opportunity to sit down and explore that further. What I would hope is that there comes a time where we're not going to be so dependent on MBS and that we can take care of some of those things in-house.
Okay, please proceed. Further questions? Go on.
Mr. Chairman, the next priority is priority 4. Through the process of the monthly ad valorem and some of the, you may recall this past biennium, we converted the remainder, our excise tax division, to a SQL environment. But during this process, ETS identified the need for some additional servers for a test development environment. And they had suggested that we ask for this $195,817 for that software that's housed at ETS.
And that's a one-time ask.
Correct. Mr. Chairman, if there are no further questions on admin services, I'd like to go to page 37 of the Excise Tax Division. The Excise Tax Division is comprised of 34 full-time employees. We do have 1 vacancy in that division today. Standard budget request of $6,399,859 with 3 exception requests totaling $52,822 for a total of $6,452,681. The 3 priorities are priority 8 is a $10,500 ask, and it is for a Google application. And it's as a result of the municipal option tax that statute and that law that went into place. This is a application, a Google app, where the customers can go out and determine, what municipality, if they are located within a municipality or not. You may recall prior to that municipal option tax, we just had county boundaries that we had to be concerned with. Now with municipal option, we've got some location determinations that have to be made. So that is an exception request. The other priority 14, again, the other division that is needing hardware replacement totaling $34,204. That's 34 PCs at $1,006 each. Again, I mentioned the priority 16, another $8,000 for telecommunication for those long distance charges that we're incurring. And with that, just a little bit of background. Fiscal year 2017, we had 32 employees in the Excise Tax Division. At that point, we had 23,329 active sales tax licenses. Fiscal year 2021, we've got 34 employees, but we've got 42,387 active licenses. We're up 82% as far as customers. I will also mention to you that turnover has impacted our productivity, constantly training new employees in the Excise Tax Division. Historically, we've seen 2 employees, 3, mostly, small numbers as far as turnover. In 2021, we had 9 employees that turned over. In addition to the turnover, we had significant legislative changes that required countless hours working with MBS to get the programming changes, make sure we weren't missing anything. Not only does that mean that we've got to help and assist with the programmers, but it means we've got internal procedures we have to update and training that has to be done for our staff. So at this point, again, I'm not asking for any additional staff. but just recognition that the 34 employees are taking on basically an 82% increase in the number of licensees that we've got. With that, I'd stand for any questions on excise tax division.
Questions? All right, please proceed.
Moving right along to page 41, mineral tax division. I appreciate the committee's time. We spent a great deal of time last week on the mineral tax division. Obviously, we're continuing to administer the severance tax collections and reporting, but the monthly ad valorem changes are taking a great deal of our time. But we do not have any exception requests, so we just are reliant on the standard budget of $2,897,928. This is an agency where we did lose one position to the COVID-19 reductions this past biennium. But quite honestly, we want to wait. We want to see what the impact is going to be. We have tried very diligently to automate within our MBS system, the software system, try to automate as many of those processes as possible. But we do know that, as we stated last week, we know that that's going to be, somewhere between 500 and 600 additional reports every month, additional checks that will be flowing into the Department of Revenue processed by administrative services. So once we know where we stand on that, we may be coming back, but I don't want to request anything until it's proven that we actually need more assistance. Are there any questions or any thoughts that came to the committee's mind since our presentation last week?
I just want to make sure you haven't raised any more requests between now and then and now. Go ahead.
No, Mr. Chairman, I will say again that legislation that we've talked about several times, where we do need to change the current statute that talks about producers reporting on and paying on the 25th of the third month following production. That will be heard in Revenue Committee. I forget whether it's Wednesday or Thursday, but this week. But it's just imperative that we get that legislation to pass and then hopefully have it effective January 1, so that everything that we're rolling out, that first reporting is going to be the 25th of February. So
Well, we
we're on crunch time.
we know that nothing is perfect the first time, and so we got our fingers crossed.
Absolutely. With that, Mr. Chairman, I'd like to move on to property tax. Page 50. The standard budget request for property tax, $4,177,721. Just right off the top of the bat, just to let you know, 50% of that is personnel cost. We do have 3 exception requests, $2,946,250. So the total budget request for property tax is $7,123,971. The first request that I want to talk about, priority 2, $118,000. This is the exception request to fund our CAMA system that is utilized by all 23 county assessors offices. It's an approximate 10% increase over the next 2. That's for the biennium. It should be noted that since 1989, when the legislature funded the first mass appraisal system and required it to be used by all 23 county assessors, funding for that program has always channeled through the property tax division budget. That exception request, in addition with priority number 9, which is $308,752, is for the hardware replacement for the county assessors offices. At $308,752, we'll purchase 185 PCs, 370 monitors, and 28 printers. You may recall this current biennium, we rolled out new servers for all the county assessors offices. So it seems we just kind of every biennium, we're either doing PCs or servers. We have, as a state, we funded those historically.
Mr. Chairman,
Go ahead.
question, Director. So what's the life expectancy on this hardware, and how long does that maintenance agreement run for? Is it the life of the hardware, or is this a biennial maintenance agreement? So just a little more information on both the life expectancy of the hardware and the maintenance.
You bet. Mr. Chairman, Senator Hicks, so when we purchase that equipment, we do look at a 4-year maintenance agreement on those PCs. That is somewhat the life expectancy. Now, on the servers that we purchased this year, they had a 6-year life expectancy and maintenance agreement that was included in the purchase price. We don't typically come back to this, to the JAC and ask for maintenance each year. We purchase it right up front when we purchase the hardware. Hope that answers your question. Mr. Chairman, priority 10, $2,519,498, and that is to fund the second flight of our oblique and orthogonal imagery statewide. You may recall that for the current biennium, when the Alvarez-Marcel study looked at all of the projects that were presented by the various agencies, they suggested that this imagery was of a high priority. And so for this current biennium, the first flight that became a reality was funded by that efficiency funds. Now, just a reminder, the oblique imagery, these are 3D aerial imagery consisting of 4 oblique perspectives shot at 40-degree angles. The first flight was completed in early 2021. The majority of the flights were done in 2020, and then we finished up Lincoln County in 2021. As of today, approximately 11,300 individual properties were identified as having changes that ultimately will generate about $2.1 million in property tax revenue in 1 year. So we know that every time, once we identify and discover those, and that's through the use of a software called Change Finder. What that Change Finder software did is it took historical imagery that was available within the counties, and then it combined the imagery that we flew in 2020 and then Lincoln County in 2021. And it was able to look at those 2 images and then give us a report of those parcels that seem to have new structures, additions, demolitions, and basically prioritize those properties for the county assessor to go out and review. And so we do require county assessors to identify those within the CAMA system so we can run reports on those imagery. In addition to the county assessors using that imagery, we do have 19 state agencies that are also accessing the imagery. Our license for the state agencies is up to 250 users that can use that based on this contract. Now, the contract provides for up to 25 users for each of the 23 counties, and the vendor did not charge us for those, but those are outside of the 250 users that we can have with state agencies.
Go ahead, Representative Larson.
Director Henson, I'm just curious on response of this now from the county assessors. Being my first question, just interested in how that, if they're liking it, if it's helped make their job easier. And then it would seem to me that that would take some of the argument out of that assessment that is comes between the landowner or the property owner and the assessor's offices. And so my second question is that, does it help remove some of that contention and argument? Or so if you could just kind of tell us.
Certainly. Mr. Chairman, Representative Larson, I've included in your packet a letter that we received from the Wyoming County Assessors Association that outlines some of the uses for it. And of course, they're advocating for the additional flight. I will tell you that the accuracy, I think, is the key piece. Not only is the accuracy and the timeliness that we pick up the information, but within that letter, you'll see that there are some comments related to the safety of the staff within county assessors' offices. As you can imagine, there are very few jobs today where you physically are going on someone else's property to collect dimensions, condition, quality workmanship, those types of things. And so we have assessors across the state that have encountered threats. Now, what this imagery, because it is oblique imagery and it is to the resolution where you can actually measure from that. If a property owner absolutely, demands that that assessor not set foot on those properties, we have options now. They don't have the option of that we don't have the information, so they're not paying the taxes. We still have information and we can pick those structures up, but we're not putting staff in danger. So I think that's important. The other thing that this does is when we get on a routine, and that's our hope, our vision is that we have these flights every 2 to 3 years max, that we know, okay, well, we know that structure wasn't there in 2020, but we know it's there in 2023. So we know the age of that structure is got to be somewhere in that time period. As a field appraiser, historically, if they've got a 6-year rotation right now for on-site inspections. And if it's been 6 years since I was there, I'm not real sure when that pole building was erected. And if I can't get a taxpayer to return my phone call to find out when it was put in place, there's, some research that has to be done. And as you can imagine, pole buildings are the hot thing right now. In fact, we're seeing a lot of they're barn dominiums, a lot of living quarters within these pole buildings. So I think what you'll hear from the assessors, and they offered to attend today. I suggested a letter, but definitely during the session, you may hear from assessors and the importance of this imagery. But it's definitely, other states are using it. We are fortunate in Wyoming that we have a structure where we have one agency. We don't have 23 county assessors out there negotiating flights. The other piece, and I could go, unfortunately, I'm a little passionate about GIS, so I could go on for a while. But one thing I do want to mention is that we're only flying the populated areas. But there is a provision within our contract that if those counties want to expand that flight path, they can get the same per mile, square mile contract that we're getting with this major contract. So it provides an opportunity if there are other areas within their counties. For example, Converse County has so much oil field and wind turbine expansion going on that they opted to go ahead and fly the entire county, getting that reduced price per square mile, but funding it themselves.
So tell us, Brenda, the 2.5 million, what does that get us in the contract service? Does that include flight miles for the next flyover? What does it include?
So, Mr. Chairman, of that contract, that 2.5 million, 2,383,754 is for the imagery itself, flights, processing that information. So the remainder, the 135,744 is for the license to view that information. It also covers the cost of that change finder software that I was talking about for the county assessors that compares the imagery to a prior year imagery. So on our licensing for the state agencies, it's called Connect 250. That runs us $10,125 per year. So that equates to about $40.50 per user. I will say that right now we've only got 88 licenses that are actively being used by state agencies. But I do believe that will increase. For example, our statewide, it's called AEGIS group, all of our GIS professionals that are in all of our state agencies, they're meeting, as a matter of fact, later this week. And we'll be giving a presentation. Our vendor will be giving a presentation telling them how other states are utilizing this information. So I think we'll have more interest.
So it sounds like they own the data.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, they do own the data. And the other thing that I think is interesting about this process is that, yes, they do the flights. We get a bit of a reduced Because we're government, we get a little bit of a reduced price on that. But the way they also price that out is they also know once the flights are completed, they have a product that they can sell licenses to view that imagery. So what our project did is for all the roof contractors in the state of Wyoming, for those insurance companies that use imagery for estimates and things like that, they have more accurate, timely data as a result of our statewide project. So not only is the governmental sector receiving this imagery, but the private sector is benefiting as well.
Go ahead, Representative Schwartz.
Thank you. So, Madam Director, I know of at least one county that has been doing this for some time. How will they interface? Will this all interface completely?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Schwartz. So there have been counties that have done the orthogonal imagery, which is the straight down view, but the oblique imagery, which is the 40-degree angles that you can actually measure from, that for the most part, except for a couple of counties, is a new technology that has been made available to county assessors. But you're right. What happens is within the CAMA system for county assessors, any imagery that was collected by the vendor is visible to that. We not only get access to the imagery that we flew, but if there was imagery that was flown, for example, Casper Mountain was flown at one time, we actually get in, we get access to that imagery as well. But you're right, with GIS, what's nice about the technology of GIS is you can connect any data set, you can connect any imagery, and we can look at it simultaneously. And so it definitely is a benefit. And I think assessors across the state would be anxious to share all the different ways that not only the assessor's office, but the other county agencies are using this related to emergency management, law enforcement, those types of things. I have been told that one of the uses that DOT used it for was they were able to use the imagery in identifying guardrails on our interstate system that needed repaired or replaced without doing an on-site. They didn't have to go out there and drive that. They were able, because the detailed imagery is such that they could actually do that inventory desktop.
So I take it that what we can anticipate is that if we fly every 2 years, we're going to get this ask it'll be a biannual ask essentially.
Mr. Chairman, that is the intent. I will say that during Director Sheehan's presentation, you heard him talk about an ask for, one of his exception requests was for enterprise GIS to be set up within ETS. We really see that this is just a complement to that effort that ETS has. Honestly, Department of Revenue and county assessors were just one piece of this. I really believe that this could be probably administered through that enterprise GIS piece through ETS. But it is something that I would ask for the exception request through the Department of Revenue budget this year. But we are definitely in talks to see how can ETS better serve all of the agencies within the state of Wyoming instead of having it go through because right now agencies have to reach out to our property tax division to get access and get that licensing. And I think it would be much better suited at ETS.
Go ahead.
Thank you. Director Arnold, would it be, I know you've had, as you testified, you've had other departments ask for that information. As you try to as you do that transition or possible transition over to ETS, would it be possible for you to ask, like you gave the example of the DOT, ask YDOT, what the value of that was, of that information was to them and the other users that used on your license? Because it twofold. One is that might facilitate that transition and give us an idea of what the overall value is, not just the fewer employees that the assessors have to use and all that, but get a total handle on what the value is across the users. And second, and I think for maybe the good co-chair was going with this at some point, might be better if we could negotiate with them so we own the data, if it looked like it was coming forward that value is really there. I know that would be an additional cost, but I just wonder how that would work out. So that would be a good way to start finding out.
Mr. Chairman, Senator, I think because it is new, as I indicated, we just got the full coverage finished up in 2021. So we really haven't had a lot of time for the agencies to really explore how it can be used. And so definitely we'll be reaching out to them. Part of the efficiency study requires us that we look at that cost analysis. There just wasn't much available this time, but definitely if we're not seeing a benefit because of accuracy, because of timeliness, cost savings, you're not going to see me here advocating for it in the future. It's up to those people on the ground to utilize this technology and make it cost effective.
So how much money did you get from the efficiency studies to do the first coverage?
Mr. Chairman, the entire amount was funded for the efficiency study. It was, I apologize, it was $2.5 million for the first flight. That contract that we entered into was for 3 flights with a clause that basically said if funding is not available, we're not committed to paying for that. But each flight was approximately $2,500,000. And that's for 2 years worth of licensing and then about 2.3 million for the imagery itself.
And so the licensing itself, if we don't renew a license, then that means the data just goes away.
Mr. Chairman, I did not explore the possibility of just purchasing the data but the tools that the licensing to view is one thing. The license also includes all of those measuring tools, analysis tools that software comes with. It's much more expensive than just viewing an aerial
It occurs to me,
imagery.
Brenda, we may want some restrictions on that data. If they sell it to the Russians, we might not like that. So there's the question is who can get their hands on it and at what price might be an interesting question.
Mr. Chairman, I will definitely look into that.
Okay, go ahead.
Couple of questions. I appreciate the comment about getting the other agencies to do it. That'll be useful information. A
Right.
certain agency doesn't have to send people out into the field. That's a great rationale for reduction of force for that agency. I'll bring that up.
Can the vice president get closer to his mic?
But so there's a lot of publicly available software that does some of this stuff already. And so it looks to me like what I understand based on your presentation is what this does is it actually flags something that's changed from the last flight. Somebody still has to go back and in ground truth, I won't say ground truth, but verify what's changed. It's just gonna flag the things that have changed. And so I'm just curious, especially as technology and in my own job, we use a lot of aerial flight data for LiDAR surveys and things like that. We're going to the satellites for everything. And so question I have is this may be obsolete technology very soon. And are we looking at getting back to buying the data and owning this? And are we now locking ourselves into a situation where we're going to have obsolete, flights versus satellite imagery and some of that stuff that's already out there already?
So, Mr. Chairman, Senator Hicks, you're right. There's satellite imagery, there's Bing imagery. In fact, part of this contract is that we get the flight path, and then we also get Bing imagery for the rest of the state. The problem with, you get what you pay for. Whether you go out to Google Maps or Bing, that imagery is not flown timely. In that we are Wyoming and there's not the customer base Sometimes, they're doing a cost analysis at those companies when they do flights, they're doing a cost analysis on, who's accessing that information, and Wyoming doesn't have that many people to access that information. So the other thing I'd like to say is typically the satellite imagery, the aerial imagery that is less expensive is that orthogonal straight down view. It is not oblique imagery. And if you can imagine the Capitol, for instance, take the Capitol as an example and what that straight down image is of the roof. Now think of the oblique imagery, that's the 40-degree angles where you can see how many stories. The quality, you can actually see the quality of the workmanship. So the oblique imagery is not a technology that's going away. If anything, it's improving because our resolution is higher. We can get better resolution and still not invade personal space. So I think we'll be okay with that. The other piece of the imagery as far as the county assessor's office. So we've identified via the program which parcels have had changes. But maybe the bigger piece of that is we've also identified the properties that haven't had any changes in footprints. We can actually sit at our desktops and we can see there's no change in footprint. So I don't have to physically send my field appraisers out there to that property. Maybe what I do instead is I spend 5 minutes on the internet on one of the real estate sites to see what the listing information was on the interior of those structures, update our information, and then Department of Revenue rules allow, as long as imagery is being collected so we can find those changes in footprints, the assessor doesn't have to do an on-site inspection once every 6 years. Without this imagery, our rules require that the assessor make an on-site inspection to verify that those things haven't changed. So that's, again, another reason for that timeliness. The assessors have time to do other things where they were, and I hate to chasing their tail. They're going out to areas of, right around the Capitol here, you can see homes that were built over 100 years ago. Their footprints have not changed. This process allows them to not physically go to those properties again.
Mr. Chairman, just a follow-up too. So one of the things that I would like to find out is capability of this software with the data is this thing that we're seeing across the state of Wyoming now is these minor subdivisions, and it's the splitting of the 40s. And so how do we flag that stuff? Because what it does is it change the assessed valuation from rural agricultural lands now, which is a significant tax advantage to both those counties and the Department of Revenue and fund our public school systems. Is there a way that we can put and you said we're only paying for certain pieces. Most of this is occurring within a certain proximity of municipalities and stuff. And I'm wondering, is there a feature that we could ask for that would include those where you see these quote minor subdivisions or the splitting of 40s that now they're still claiming the ag exemption or their property taxes when clearly they're not agricultural properties because of, is there some way we can capture that within this to make this more efficient?
So, Mr. Chairman, Senator Hicks, so in addition to the mapping responsibilities of the county assessors, I mean, whenever you have a record of survey, which is what you're specifically questioning, they're not subdivision plats, but they're records of survey because they exceed the 35-acre requirement of having to go through the platting process. So before those can be marketed, those records of surveys have to be recorded in the county clerk's office, and the county assessor is responsible for mapping those. And so we find those typically through that process. Now, the imagery is going to help us, like you said, as far as identifying new roads that have been put in, things like that. And then if there's new structures. So I think that it's twofold. I think assessors have the ability with their mapping programs to go ahead and process those via the information from the clerk's office. But then we just look at how quickly, if we're on a 2-year rotation on those flights, how rapidly are we seeing new structures? Quite honestly, there is not a requirement for building permits for a vast majority of the state of Wyoming. And so we don't have that as a tool to find out about new structures. This is that tool at this point. Or feet on the ground county employees going out once every 6 years and finding those new structures. So I appreciate your comments.
Representative Morris.
Mr. Chairman?
1 second, please. Go ahead, Representative Morris.
Director Henson, what's the difference with the imagery that you get from this versus the imagery that YDOT uses on their bridge? And
So, Mr. Chairman, Representative Larson, I apologize. I have not actually seen what the tools are that YDOT have. But it would be a great question. I'd be happy to research.
maybe we could,
I
you
do
know-
know that they don't have oblique imagery, the 3D dimensional.
yeah, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm going to follow that up. They have an aircraft equipped with a camera. I think it would be great to research what it would cost to upgrade that camera to do this oblique imagery. Because I think it could be useful for both YDOT as well as your agency. And as opposed to contracting it out, flying it in-house, and we, the state, already have the aircraft, and it's quite new with very low hours on it. It would be a good use of resources if the updated camera equipment could be acquired at a cost-effective methodology.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Walters, definitely. I mean, it's always worth investigating. I do know that the imagery itself, the oblique imagery, obviously that's a patent that our vendor has. But as far as the process, I do know that our vendor dedicates 23 planes to our project to fly the populated areas statewide. But, definitely always open to see if there's a cost savings at an alternate source. So I entertain that discussion with YDOT.
Mr. Co-Chair, do you have a question?
Yes, I did. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And there was a number of the other questions kind of went around the edges of this, but ultimately, if I understand the process, we paid $2.5 million per flight to that basically we're paying the company to acquire the data, to acquire the information that's translated into data. And then ultimately we also pay to get the data back. And so that just finds that a little bit curious. And I'm wondering if ultimately they're making additional money off the licensing and the use of that data. It seems to me that that we ought to be at least be getting some kind of substantial discount from that, because ultimately we're paying for them to acquire the data that they turn around and license out. And I don't know if we got into that far, Brenda, but I'm just interested if you've had any kind of discussions with the vendor about that situation, or maybe I'm just misunderstanding it. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Perkins, I think your question is very pointed and very accurate in that I asked that question. And what would our cost be if they did not have that ability to license to private sector and other businesses to view that imagery? And you're right, we got a substantial discount. I cannot tell you what it was right offhand, but as a governmental entity flying these sectors, we did get a substantial discount as opposed to what private sector would pay. But I don't have exact numbers.
Well, and all you know is what they tell you.
That's true.
Okay, go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, if there are no more questions on the imagery, I did want to finish up with the property tax division. It's an interesting division within the agency in that of the $4.1 million in our standard budget request, $2,369,083 of those operating funds are direct pass-through to our local county assessors' offices. And that's in the form of their CAMA system, hardware, the software, educational opportunities, appraisal manuals, and miscellaneous other items. In addition, as we just discussed, the primary use right now for the imagery is for discovery by the county assessor's office. So what that means, and the reason I bring it up, is that leaves $166,393 that we use to fund the rest of the statutory responsibilities of the property tax division. That's the money that we use to appraise all of our department assessed companies. That's how we monitor. That's the money we use to pay for staff to monitor the systems for all of the software that we use within the agency. So when we had the COVID reductions, we lost one position within the property tax division. We're down to 10 full-time employees within that division. And what we're wanting to just mention, I want to mention, is that I may be coming back in the future because for one thing, I'm real concerned about the turnover. We've talked about the turnover at the agency. We're seeing similar turnover in county assessors' offices, and we're responsible for the education piece for those county assessors. And so I'm concerned. I know we've had 4 elected assessors that have resigned midterm this term. Next year's an election year. We already know that there are approximately that many that are not going to run again. So you're talking 8 new assessors. Sometimes with new assessors, they bring new staff, and it's just a lot of hands-on training for the Department of Revenue. And so with that, I just leave that as something in the back of your mind that I think the property tax division may need to, at minimum in the future, get that staff person back. Honestly, the reason that we're able to continue and get all of our department assessed properties, we're talking railroads, telecoms, major industrial properties. The only reason we're able to continue to get those valued is because I've got staff on that have been there for many years. And so they're able to take on those responsibilities. But that may not be so in the future. With that, Mr. Chairman,
One second. Representative Stiff, you have a question?
Mr. Chairman, thank you very much. Mr. Chairman, Director Henson, I wanted to ask you a question similar to what I posed to the Secretary of State, and it's this. At the Secretary of State's office, limited liability companies file annual reports at which they're supposed to report the actual value of, among other things, their real estate. And it's just kind of an honor system right now. Department of Revenue has in its computers the fair market values of commercial real estate across the state, much of which is owned by limited liability companies. My question is for you is, how big a lift would it be, or how disruptive would it be to your operations if the legislature said, okay, Secretary of State, you're going to hook up your computers and tie into the Department of Revenue's database so that when people fill out their annual reports for their limited liability companies, the fair market value of their real estate will automatically populate into this form that they have to fill out every year. Do you have any sense, and you may not, do you have any sense for how difficult a project that might be from your point of view?
Mr. Chairman and Representative, so the first hurdle would be the confidentiality statutes that are in place in Title 39, in that taxpayer returns are not public information and cannot be disclosed. So we'd need to get past that hurdle. The other thing that it's important to know that we value entire companies. So it's not just the assets that are located in the state of Wyoming. For example, we're getting annual reports of assets that are multiple states. So, going through that. The other thing is they are reporting book values when they are reporting to us. As far as the fair market value, we value the company as a whole, as if it were to sell all in one company. The railroad, for example, we value as if that railroad, our portion piece in the state of Wyoming, if it were to sell. And so we don't really have what you would typically think on local assessments, where you can go to the county assessor and see we've got X fair market value on the land, we've got X fair market value on the 1,200 square foot house, we've got X market value on the 198 square foot shed. That's not the type of detail that we would have. We would have book value. And if it were disclosed, I will tell you that those annual reports come in and our data they're actually in Excel spreadsheets. So it's not like we have a database where it's all included. It's a separate Excel spreadsheet for each one of those companies. So if this is something that you would like us to pursue further, maybe we just need to have a meeting with the Secretary of State's office and see if it would be of any assistance, or if they're simply getting the information for just what's located in the state of Wyoming and their book values. Maybe what they've got is easier than trying to incorporate what we've got as a company as a whole.
Okay. Any other questions? Please proceed.
Okay, Mr. Chairman, if it pleases the committee, I'd like to move to the property tax refund program that's noted on page 52. You will find that we are not including in our budget request funding for the property tax refund program. You may recall that it was funded in this current biennium. We had the refunds that went out in 2020. Those were refunding up to 1/2 of the property taxes that were paid by those qualifying property owners in 19. They had to have paid their 19 property taxes in order to apply for the refund. I've included in the documentation a summary of what it takes to qualify for the property tax refund program. In addition, I've got some of the historic numbers. The last year that it was funded, there were 1,411 refunds, totaling $752,320.12. The funding for the following year, which would have been the 2020 taxes, 2021 refunds, that remaining money was reverted back as part of the COVID cuts. So it's not available currently. But certainly if it were something that the legislature wanted to look at, somewhere between, I would say, $1.7 million and $2 million for the biennium would fund that program based on historical numbers. Now, one thing we do know, property values are increasing, and perhaps the number of qualified applicants would be increased as well. If you look back at some of the historical, there was a time where we had 1,800 plus folks that qualified for that refund to the tune of almost $1 million. That number has reduced in the more recent years, but definitely that might be a program that would expand as far as the cost of it. I did want to let you know that Christie's group has been working with ETS to create the software, the program to allow a applicant to go online and apply for that benefit. Even though it's not funded, we still know we have to be in the ready, so that if the legislature does fund the program, that we stand at ready to go ahead and have those applications available. So I think you anticipate that hopefully that'll finish up this biennium, so we don't have to encumber any of those funds, but ETS has been working with us to get that program in place. Any questions on the property tax refund program?
Okay.
With that, we only have the liquor division left.
What do you mean only?
Only the liquor division. Page 62 is where we would start the discussion of the Wyoming Liquor Division. We have 41 full-time employees at the division, 10 contract employees, and we've got some temporary staff out there. Currently, as of today, we've got 5 vacancies out at the liquor division. This is an enterprise budget. As you know, the standard budget request is $8,286,179. We have 9 exception requests totaling $2,268,810. for a total budget of $10,969,000 plus. I'd like to go through the exception requests. The first one being priority 3, and then I'm going to skip to priority number 7. Priority 3 is a $45,000 increase. It's basically a cost estimate for an increased cost for our current system that we've got out at the liquor division, the Encompass software. We also have priority number 7, which was an ask of $578,800 for the resurrection of e-liquor. If it pleases the committee, I would like to cover the other exception requests and then cover exactly where we're at on the software at the liquor division in one
Okay, one
step.
second. Representative Larson.
Well, maybe I'll wait. Let's go through that and then I'll come back. Comes back to the. So the maintenance agreement on priority 3 is the system that we were having trouble with through the summer.
That is correct, Mr. Chairman. Representative Larson, yes, that was the estimated cost of what it would take to continue with that contract, but we'll get into where we're at on that process and what's in the standard budget. It's also related to that software. So we'll cover that all in one step.
Okay.
So with that, I'll move on to priority number 5, which is a $500,000 increase to our temp staff contract. So we have in our standard budget, $666,349. So with that exception request, that increases us to $1,166,349. What I wanted to point out is that that is similar to exactly what we had in the current biennium, but we did the 500,000 by B11. You will find that my preference is to not use the B11 process as we go through this budget. I would much rather, and you're going to see that with our spending authority and those types of things, that they've been handled by B11s in the past. And what we're proposing this year is that we just include it in our regular budget. So with that, then I'll move on to the priority number 6, $1.4 million. And you may recall in December, the governor's office granted us funding for 10 AWAC positions, contract employees out of the liquor division, with the premise that those would move to FTEs in the next biennium. So that's what that request is for. I'll also talk about how that money's been used after we get through the rest of these exception requests. Priority number 11, $96,500 for shop equipment. That's in the form of 3 electric tow motors at $40,000 each, 1 forklift at $35,000, and 12 carts at $21,500 each. Priority number 12 of our exception request is $298,050. That's for the training for intervention procedure services, the TIPS program, commonly known. That particular program, again, was victim to the COVID-19 cuts in the last budget. It was in the standard budget, prior budgets. So I'm requesting that it be added back in for the next biennium. You may recall in 2003, House Bill 260 actually put the statutory language by which the Department of Revenue would, through the Wyoming Liquor Division, fund that program for our retailers. Over the time period 2000 to 2020, over 37,000 trainers were served, or excuse me, servers were trained using those funds. And we're hopeful that we can reinstate that. As you know, we see a lot of turnover in those establishments as well. And I do have numbers. I believe it's 21 communities statewide that require that training. And right now it's coming out of the retailers' pockets to pay for that. So with that, we are moving on to priority 13, $37,940 for IT hardware. That's for 12 iPod scanners at $57.48, 5 HP laser printers, $82.75, 3 color printers at $45.90, And then for Zebra label printers that we use in the warehouse, 10,694, 3 iPads, and then some miscellaneous to add up to that 37,940. Priority 18 is $100 million, again, for liquor purchases. And you can see some of the history of our budgeting for liquor purchases on page 71. In addition, on page 76, you'll see the budgeting on the transfer to the general fund for the profit accounts. You will find that our historical numbers basically show that we're always coming back mid-year for a B11 to increase the spending authority. And so my preference is that we just include that in our standard budget in future years. But certainly it's the, however the JAC wants to handle those. I can go into more details as far as what those B11s have been going back to 2013 for that liquor purchasing expense if you wish. But I can tell you that it has been in excess of the 175 million that is in our standard budget, at least going back to 2013. The transfer of profits to the general fund history, as I stated, was noted on page 77. I will tell you that one of the reasons for the increased dollar amounts on these is, of course, we're selling in quantity more alcohol. And of course, those price points are increasing as well. So that leads for an increase for both of those. And with that, I would like to move on to the real crux of the matter at the liquor division. So, as I mentioned, increased liquor sales. The number of 9-liter cases at the liquor division fiscal year 20, we had 1,052,676. In fiscal year 21, that was up 6.47% to 1,120,165. We had over 69,000 cases of special items that were shipped to retailers, which is up from the 55,000 the previous year. Our online ordering system was used by 995 retailers, placing over 60,000 orders this past year. I did want to let you know that working with ETS, we did install in the internet redundancy, so we're no longer down. That was something that was a priority, did not come out of our budget. ETS funded that, and that was installed approximately 2 weeks ago. So we no longer will have that situation where we're down and our customers can't place orders, nor can we work in the agency. I wanted to let you know, Tom Montoya, who's sitting behind me, he took the reins as administrator on July 14th of 2021. I started with the agency on August 2nd. Immediately, we began the process to replace the computer system that was installed and went live on September 21st of 2020. Staff from every group within the liquor division were included in the process to identify all of the components that we need within that software out at the liquor division. We spent countless hours, not only liquor division staff, but ETS has been a significant workhorse on this process. And I'm pleased to state that with the combined efforts, we have an RFP that was posted on the State of Wyoming procurement site on December 2nd. So it's out there right now, hoping that we get some takers on that. I did want to mention that we also reached out to both the retailers and the industry reps to also provide us with guidance on what they'd like to see in that software, because they use it as well. Our proposals, the deadline is January 30th of 2022. We are scheduled for oral presentations by vendors winter of 2022, tentative contract award date of winter 2022, and we hope to start that conversion process in spring of 2022. We We'll have extensive testing that we'll complete prior to going live with any prospective system. Our current contract with Encompass expires September 30th of 2022. The amount of that contract, which is in our standard budget, is $556,000. With exception request number 3 for an additional $45,000 and exception request number 7, that $578,800, that gives us a total of $1,179,800 that can be redirected towards the purchase of a new system. I don't believe that that's going to suffice. I don't think that that is going to cover the cost of conversion and the cost of software. However, because of the timing of that RFP, before the legislature convenes, we should have a pretty good idea what that system will cost. And we would like to meet with this committee prior to the session convening. I do anticipate that we will be running both systems until we are absolutely certain that that new system that we put in place, we've got some room there because of our contract. Our current contract is already paid through September of 2022 on Encompass. So that gives us a little bit of time to convert to the new system. The other thing that I wanted to state is before we convert to a new system, we are going to do a complete physical inventory of our product in the warehouse so that we know when we start off with a new system exactly what those numbers are. So I think that'll be a true benefit.
So when you say new system, what you're saying is we're going to go back to the old system that's enhanced. Is that right?
Mr. Chairman, we are not limiting ourselves. Our RFP is encompassing, and I don't use that word, it's in the software name. Our new system is intended to be a system that will handle every aspect of the Wyoming Liquor Division, from the online ordering, for our retailers, to our warehouse management system, to our compliance section that was not included in historical amounts. So now, do those vendors, our old, the e-liquor, for example, they'll have the opportunity to put in a proposal for a system, but we did not want to limit ourselves in any way.
Director Henson, I just thank you for having that RFP and not sole sourcing. That made us real nervous mid last year when it looked like maybe it's going that way. It just is not good government to do that. So, you know, be interested to see how the RFP turns out. I'm a little confused though on your priority 7 on the
E-liquor.
on the e-liquor, and that's the one we currently are using, correct? Or is that the old one?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Larson, that is the online ordering system that was in place prior to converting to Encompass. At the time, I mean, when this budget was put together last May, Director Noble's intent was to reach out to that vendor and see what it would cost to bring it up to current. So that's why you see it separated as an e-liquor enhancement.
Okay. And thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just get the different vendors mixed up. And so priority 3 is maintenance agreement
On our current system.
on our current one. And is that something that, and that ends in September 2022?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, yes,
But
Representative.
they're requesting in that increase?
Mr. Chairman, yes, when we got estimated numbers, their contract for the next biennium would have been the $556,000 that's included in the standard budget, plus an additional $45,000 for the next biennium.
And I want to make sure this is the system that hasn't performed as well as we'd like.
That is correct.
Why then? It seems like they ought to be paying us $45,000. I'm serious as a heart attack. We have really had trouble, and I really have angst because it has cost retailers in my part of the world, and this isn't you guys' fault, but this has not been good, and it just really is. You know, I hope you understand that I honestly. So-
Mr. Chairman, Representative, we definitely understand. We know the extra work that it has caused our staff out at the
Yeah,
liquor
me too.
division. In addition to the retailers, we understand that retailers are totally reliant on our ability to do our job at the liquor division. And so while I recognize that we have not been pleased with that contract, unfortunately, when you look at the 556,000 plus the 45,000, I mean, you folks on JAC, you hear what software contracts cost. How many contracts have you had that, I mean, I hate to say we got what we paid for, but we got what we paid for. And it really was not a system that was geared or had the functionality that is necessary at the Wyoming Liquor Division.
Well, and Mr. Chairman, I appreciate that. I am just struggling to understand why we would pay them another penny and why they would, did they make that request with a straight face? And I'm not trying to be mean there. I'm really am struggling, having a hard time to understand why
Certainly.
there would be any effort whatsoever on their part and why we would even entertain that request on our part.
And Mr. Chairman, I think, you know, at the time the budget representative was put together, I mean, we're talking last May. They had been live since September. I absolutely believe that my predecessor had hope that with time, they could work out all of the issues
Right.
that were in place. And so I do believe that that is why within this budget request, you see that additional $45,000 to continue to be on the Encompass program. But it was not until later that the additional 578.8 was requested and put in that budget request. But it just was not the direction that Administrator Montoya and I wanted to go.
So,
Follow up, Mr.
go ahead.
Would you, and just let me tell you that the liquor retailers were doing backflips down Main Street when they found out that Director Montoya was back at the helm. Thrilled, and we say thank you.
And Mr. Chairman, little did I know it at the time that those events were going to affect my life. I share that enthusiasm.
So I have a question on so my understanding was the reason that we got brought on the additional AWAC positions was because the new system wasn't working. So we needed additional personnel to operate it when we transferred to that new program. If we're going to go back to a new system that theoretically will be more aligned with the prior system, and if we put in all of the appropriate mechanisms to be efficient in the way that we stock and ship, then why would we make those 10 positions permanent? In addition, then, but in expanding your ability for the at-will employees that come and do the unloading, the stocking, and that type of stuff. So that's what really doesn't make sense to me. It seems to me we ought to keep them AWAC until we see this new upgraded position and know exactly how much it needs in order to complete our volume. I realize our volumes are up. Theoretically, that would be more staffing, but we don't know how much that is in terms of warehouse space, in terms of actual shipment loads.
So, Mr. Chairman, that's a great segue to my staffing challenges at the liquor division. And I certainly understand what you're saying. So the intent for temp staff, and we've had temp staff for years, is for those heavy seasons. Unfortunately, over the past 12 months, we've had to really rely on our temp staff because quite honestly, we couldn't get applicants. We couldn't fill the positions at the liquor division. We couldn't fill the positions in the warehouse. So due to vacancies, for example, in accounting, we had to use temporary help. I've got 10 full-time employees in the accounting division group within the liquor division. 4 to 5 of those positions were vacant until just recently. We've got 1 vacancy today. Purchasing has a total of 8 staff. For the first time in months, we're fully staffed in purchasing. Enforcement, we've got 3 positions in enforcement. We're down 1 staff member in enforcement today. But warehouse staff salaries, we have 21 full-time employees in the warehouse. The governor, as you stated, provided some funding for the contract employees, but we couldn't fill the positions. So what we've done is kind of step back. We have 3 supervisor positions within the warehouse. 2 of them were classified 08s, 1 of them was classified in 09. That 09 position became vacant. So what we did is we reached out and we reclassified that position to an 08. So now we have 3 08s. When it came to the money that we had available for the AWACS, instead of hiring 10 employees, we hired 9. And what that did is it saved some money so that we could go from $15.28 an hour on what we're paying those shipping and receiving clerks to $17.25 an hour. I'm happy to report because of that, all the AWAC positions have been filled. We're down 2 full-time employee positions, but we hope to have those filled by the end of the month. But that is how we were able to at least start getting applications, because quite honestly, we just cannot compete with the other warehouses in town. And so I think the ability to make those full-time employees, they know that that's the ask that we're including in our budget this next biennium. So I think that there's some, those people that are on contract right now, they're hopeful that those will turn into the full-time employees of the state of Wyoming. I have employees at the liquor division that have been there 30 plus years. Once being a part of that organization historically has been sought after. And we definitely want to get to that again. But I think you're right. We do have increased workload. The other thing we lost over the past year was next day delivery. You may have heard that from some of your retailers. When I first took on the role as director, I reached out to numerous retailers and I heard it over and over again. We'd really like you to go back to next day shipment. Well, that's something that we're going to have to look at, but it's going to take resources. So I'm believing that those 10 additional full-time staff may help us to get to that next day shipment again. We'll be having a discussion on January 3rd on what are our options? What's it going to take to get us back to next day
Well,
shipment?
we had that discussion last year here. And the issue was, why should we be the warehouse for the next day delivery for a bottle of alcohol across the state? I don't know if that's very logical.
Right.
In many ways, we don't do it for anybody else, and no one else does it in other states the way that we do.
And Mr. Chairman, I think that that's that discussion that we need to have with our retailers. If in fact that is important to you as a retailer, perhaps some of those costs, perhaps that markup needs to be re-examined. But we put that discussion on the table and include those retailers to say, if it is important to you, are you willing to pay a little more for it? And put some of that ownership with them. I think if they find that we just can't afford to do that, and they're included in that discussion, we're going to be better off, as opposed to just saying it's not possible.
Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead, Senator.
Thank you. I just want to make sure I have this couple things clear. The 10 AWAC employees weren't necessarily because the system wasn't working correctly. It was because kind of a perfect storm of the system and the fact that our volumes were increasing at a tremendous rate prior to, it actually started prior to COVID. And so those things kind of occurred at the same time, but we're independent of each other. Isn't that true?
Mr. Chairman and Senator, absolutely in that, again, we were relying on the temporary staff in many instances where we shouldn't have been. And temporary staff, I really want to get an employee that we've trained and then doesn't walk out the door in 2 months. We want to make sure that these employees are productive.
If I can follow up.
Go ahead.
And then, and whatever the, whatever system that comes up through this RFP process, unlike the last system, you're going to go through a full training process, not only with your employees, but with the potential, with the retail community as well. And are working with them now to do that. Isn't that true?
Absolutely. And I appreciate your bringing that up, Senator.
Last question. When it comes to next day delivery and, you know, prior to all of this happening in the past, that had been the standard and the standard of the liquor division.
That's
And
correct.
that is what the retailers expect or always could expect, what we call the gold standard. That was the norm at the liquor division, correct?
Correct.
And that if we do get back to that point, it may be a point where we might want to be talking to our retailers about paying for that service. And yes, should they expect that service going forward is a reasonable question, a fair question to ask them as you go through that process. Isn't that true as well?
True. Mr. Chairman, Senator, there is a planning process that Administrator Montoya and I will embark on after the first of the year, once we wanted to get the RFP behind us. But we really need to look to the future. Alcohol sales is not going to go down. And in addition to software, we may need more room for product. There are many things, and I'm hopeful that within the next year.
I thought that's what that pole barn was for.
We don't have a pool barn. But Mr. Chairman, I think that it's incumbent on the agency to look 10 years down the road and start planning so that this committee and the legislature has a succession where we can say, you know, this is how we're going to keep up with demand and continue to keep the retailers with product on their shelves. So I would hope that we can have a continued conversation about that. And Mr. Chairman, if I have not answered all the questions related to liquor, I would invite Administrator Montoya, if you have questions you'd like to address to him specifically, he'd be happy to answer.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Director Hibbard, this may be more back to you, listening to the way she addressed her compensation to the at-will folks. If I heard her correctly, we had X number, we had X number of positions, funded positions. She sacrificed one position to increase the funding for the rest. So if we went in and we said, just hypothetical, and we says, we're going to cut one of those positions, would that funding come with it as well?
We do it.
If you had a vacancy for it and you had that vacant position, you identified it, you cut that one, then you would be taking no dollars.
And so that's, you know, it's just kind of a conversation, Director Henson, we've had as we look to this. There's some challenges with using that exercise is you never know what this committee would do. And so we could come back and cut that, and then what do you do?
Right. And Mr. Chairman, Representative, we didn't have contract employees within the liquor division prior to December of 2020. So you're right, it is a new funding stream for positions. So I recognize the challenge.
Yeah. Just be careful.
Mr. Chairman, the ask that's in front of you is to take those 10 positions that we gave them and make them full-time positions. And in doing so, try to assist the agency battling retention issues. AWACS are going to be always a plague of retention. And that retention, training, picking, hiring, interviewing, all those things associated with that cost the state more money. So the intent here would be going from an AWAC to a full-time position and then fund the full 10 positions. So that one position that is resolved by the funding the full 10 at full time. And then consider what's the difference between an AWAC position and a full-time position. It used to be a lot bigger of an issue prior to the feds changing the law. Now we actually do give AWAC single benefit for EGI. So naturally, if you had a full-time position and they wanted to change their cafeteria plan selection because they're having a child or something like that, that would be part of that. So what's really the difference is retirement. Are you going to expect an employee to stick around? And if you are you going to give them a retirement?
Hello, Mr. Chairman. So, and I think we understand all of that. This is just this goes back to some discussion we've had in the budgeting process throughout the agencies, as we have the vacancy report and we look at different positions, be it AWAC, be it an FTE. We look at it and we see an associated amount with that. And so this group thinks that when we cut that, then we're also reducing it by that amount. And then we find out that, well, you're taking that body out, but the funding for that has been distributed amongst the others, and it causes a real problem. And just trying to avoid those types of situations is I think would benefit all of us.
Yes, and I fully agree. We just discussed the basics of enterprise. These AWACS would be
Fair enough. Fair enough. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So this
Mr. Chairman, are there any further questions related to the Wyoming Liquor Division?
I don't see any.
Okay, with that, I just have some general comments related to staffing for the agency. Just to let you know, in 2009, we had 133 full-time employees in the agency. So in 2021, once we subtract the 2 for human resources, we were at 109 for the agency. COVID impacts in the form of 3 positions that we lost in the agency. Employee absenteeism due to illness, quarantine. We lost 138 days just to COVID admin leave, which is about 5.5% of our total man hours. And I can tell you that staff are finding it very difficult to take any leave time at this point, and our exempt employees are working longer hours. Recruitment, it's no secret that the state agencies are seeing fewer qualified applicants for open positions. Compensation is simply just not sufficient to entice people to take our positions. Management is spending significantly more time interviewing and training new staff. Of that 109 positions, 40 of our positions have been filled more than 2 times in this biennium. 40 positions. Unfortunately, based on the pool of applicants that we're seeing, we're forced to hire staff that do not bring the knowledge and the skill set that we've seen historically. And they don't have the skill set in order to get up to speed and accomplish the job in a short amount of time. So supervisors are starting with very basic tasks, and they hope to mold them into productive members of the team. I do want to emphasize, with all this gloom and doom, the Department of Revenue staff in this biennium continue to accomplish all the statutory duties required of them. That included a heavier workload, challenges of the lack of staff, and the ongoing pandemic. In addition to our historical responsibilities, additional duties have included many statutory changes requiring programming, training of both staff and our customers. While we have 111 funded FTEs, there are only 62 of those folks that are in the same position they were in on July 1 of 2020. So we're seeing a lot of changes. But I do want to say, we have 18 of our staff that have worked 20 to 29 years. I particularly want to recognize staff with 30 or more years of experience. Thinking back 30 years ago, when communication was in writing, communication was on the phone, and we had to handwrite letters. I just want to ask your indulgence while I state 11 people: Tom Montoya, Lance Lebsack, Donna Campbell, Patty Palmer, Arliss Bauer, Tara Connolly Callis, Richard Meese, Terry Lucero, Aaron Smith, Tracy Bagby, Craig Renbeck, and David Chapman, all with over 3 decades devoted to the citizens of Wyoming. So over the next 6 months, staff will be completing that strategic plan for each of our groups, or each of our divisions, for the next 10 years. And these are really challenging times. I want to thank the staff of the Department of Revenue, from Felicia Eagles, who just started with our agency a week ago today, to our division administrators who sit before you today with over 145 years of combined experience in administering both taxation and liquor laws. We couldn't have accomplished those tasks this past year without their leadership and guidance. But I want to thank the members of this committee, because by my count, I'm showing that in addition to your regular legislative duties and the other committees that you serve on, you've spent at least 20 additional days just listening to JAC. What a contribution you have. And sometimes I don't think it's recognized enough. I've had the opportunity to work with many of you through years of service. I want to thank you for your time and your dedication to the citizens of Wyoming. I leave you with this thought: the difference between stumbling blocks and stepping stones is what you do with them. And I think that has definitely been something that I've listened to and thought about these past 4 months. I want to thank you for your time, and I look forward to working with you as we fine tune the Department of Revenue's budget. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. Appreciate it very much, Brenda. Good to see you again, Tom.
Mr. Chairman,
Senator Hicks.
just a comment, and I appreciate those comments, and I understand the challenges. And I don't think these challenges are going to go away. I read an article recently that said 78% of small businesses interviewed across the United States can't find help. There's 11 million vacant jobs.
That's right.
Of the top 500 corporations in the United States, 50% of them said they cannot find qualified people to fill. So the idea that by bringing in more people or somehow is a challenge, that whether you're in the private sector or government sector, is something that we're going to deal with. So the question becomes, is how do we maintain that institutional knowledge, long-term commitments, and increase our efficiency? So I think you understand the challenges.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Director, I think you're up to the challenge, and your staff is too. And we want to continue to work with you. But,
Thank
it's
you,
not a
Senator.
unique situation. We just need to come up with some unique solutions to your stepping stone.
You're right. We always say, let's use technology, Mr. Chairman. We use technology to be able to take on that increased workload. Well, that's true to a certain extent, but we're seeing challenges there as well. Getting IT professionals. You've heard from Director Sheehan, his challenge that he's got in looking, and even our vendors. I think we are going to see some increased costs because they're seeing the same challenges and trying to recruit developers and programmers. Again, I mentioned assessors' offices across the state. They're having challenges trying to get staff. So it's going to take an all hands on deck approach to ensure that our tax structure, the administration of the liquor division, continues to have those high standards. But you're right, we're all in it together.
Okay, thank you very much. We'll take a 15-minute recess. We'll be back on our next agency at 3:40 something. 3:52.
Hello, hello, hello.
Hello, hello, hello.
Just doing a test. Test 1, 2, test.
Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Okay,
Strange
good.
voice from the world.
I can hear you. I can hear you. Is anybody still in the room?
Chairman Perkins, are you there?
Yes, I'm here.
Okay, the committee is on break right now.
I was just asking what we had left on the agenda today.
Chairman Perkins, it's very hard to hear you.
Can you hear me now?
It's a little better, yes.
Well, I'm out in the middle of Wyoming driving, so it fades in and out. What's left on the agenda today?
We have water development on the agenda as well as the military department.
So where are we as far as, are we ahead of schedule or on schedule or behind schedule?
We're a little bit behind schedule.
All right, thank you.
You're welcome.
Welcome. Brandon, it's good to see you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My name's Brandon Gebhardt, interim state engineer, but today I'll be wearing my water development director hat. With me, I've got David Ray, the chief fiscal operator. Also Jason Mead, who is the interim director. And in the audience, I've got Barry Lawrence, who is the director of our planning division, and Bill Brewer, who is the director of our construction division. Mr. Chairman, I'll try to be brief and concise and stand for any questions, but just very quickly, the state of the agency. We are not a general fund agency, as you well know. We get our accounts are funded through distribution of the mineral severance tax. And the budget that we'll be talking about today comes out of Water Development Account 1. Our agency operates with 4 divisions: the construction, the planning, dam and reservoir, and administration. And we've got 25 full-time staff. I'll just highlight a couple of successes and efficiencies over the past year or so. These have largely been aimed at repositioning the agency to address some of the challenges that we see coming forward. And an example of that, we're working through restructuring some of the positions within the agency to help us blur the line between the divisions, but also to, in the concept of retention, create a room for advancement for our staff. That's kind of the strategy to that. But the main role of the one that we've repurposed is to help us with tracking federal funding, as well as helping with the aging infrastructure issue that we see. And that leads to some of the challenges that we do see. Aging infrastructure is a very large challenge to our agency. That's evidenced by the LaPrelle Dam that you've all heard of, as well as the Goshen irrigation tunnel collapse. And then any potential other issues like this that are out there that we may not know about. We've also presented to the Water Development Commission and Select Water a statewide analysis or assessment study to help us identify those risks throughout the state, and then ultimately would be to develop a priority of those larger types of projects. So we're trying to address those challenges as well. You've heard a lot about employee retention and recruitment. We've got similar issues within our agency. We've had 3 recently long tenured people retire. We've lost 1 to the private sector. We've lost 1 to an opportunity within the local government. I will testify today that we've had a recent run of pretty good luck with some of our positions. We had a slew of qualified applicants within the last month. So we are able to restaff with that pool a little bit. So the vacancy report may have shifted a little bit. We'll still have at least 1 vacancy after this, but we feel much better now than we did a couple months ago. Moving on, Mr. Chairman, I'll just touch on how our agency would be impacted by the HR A&I pay adjustment update. Under step 1, we would not have any impacts. All of our folks would be within 80% of the 2020 market minimum. The step 2, looking at our numbers, our impact would be about 103,000 to take us to the merit-based matrix with folks that we have.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, that's a very brief state of the agency, if you will. We could begin review of the budget if you would like.
Please, go ahead.
Well, Mr. Chairman, our budget, we've come in with a flat budget. We've gotten no exception requests. And in fact, our budget is down slightly, about 58,500, 600 from the last biennium. That's largely due to adjustments with benefits as well as the statewide cost allocations. And then, Mr. Chairman, if it helps, that we could skip to page 29, which is for our agency, probably a pretty good table to go through. And I'd be happy to back up and go over anything that anybody would like, but I think 29 provides a pretty good summary for us to discuss.
Okay,
So, Mr. Chairman, under the class 100, our recommended budget is $5,811,480. That's for our salaries, benefits, commissioner salaries. And that number is down slightly from the base budget. Our supported services, our 200 division, were flat from the previous biennium. Cost allocations, those adjusted a little bit. We went up a little bit to $313,066. Our 400 series slightly reduced from the last biennium, a total of $34,562. Our space rental under Division 500 is flat from the previous years. And then our contractual services is also flat. So, Mr. Chairman, we've come in, like I said, with a flat budget request. Mr. Chairman, I would stop there and I would answer any questions, but that's really our budget in a nutshell.
so I'm curious about your prioritization progress. You talked about how you prioritize between water 1, water 2, water 3, and then you just recently kind of looked at all of them and then prioritized further. So I'm just curious what that resulted in, and if you're done with it, I'd like where we can have a look at what you came up with.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, we did have that. We've had some meetings with Select Water and the commission on that. We have not finalized it into criteria yet. That would be the combined list. Our program priorities, the previous ones are in our criteria, but we can certainly give you, in fact, we have it here. We can send this combined priority schedule out. This combines all of the programs within the agency, and we've had discussions, and ultimately this would be in our criteria, but we could certainly.
Sure, if you can just provide it to Don, we'll make a copy and we'll pass it out to everybody. So,
Okay.
That'd be great. Thank you. Senator Hicks? No? Any other further questions? Well, this is the best agency all day.
And they're smiling.
Yeah. Okay, I don't think there's any further questions. I think we're there. Thank you very much. Sorry to keep you waiting all day in bated breath for this brief moment in time. So I appreciate your help and your service. Okay, we'll keep moving. Military Department. Yeah, boom. Seven. Welcome, and please proceed. We've got a couple chairs empty that because they're either en route or they're online. So we're ready to go.
Hey, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a quick combo check. I think I've got this operating correctly.
Sounds like it. If you
All
hear
right,
a
so-
little echo, you're on.
Little echo. All right. Let me try this. Hey, well, greetings. For the record, my name is Major General Greg Porter, and I serve as the Adjutant General for the state of Wyoming. Let me have the team here introduce themselves before we get going.
I'm Doug Shope, Deputy Director for the agency.
Well, I was almost technically challenged there. Tim Shepard, the Executive Director for the Wyoming Veterans Commission.
Good to see you, Tim. Okay, go ahead.
All right, Mr. Chairman, I think I would, if it pleases you and the committee, I would just give a quick update of the military department and we'll move right into the budget after that. In terms of how you'd like to approach the budget, you want us to go page by page? Is there a specific order method that you would prefer us to address that with, sir?
Thank you. Yeah, if you'll just walk us through each division quickly, just and anything that changes or different or things of interest you want to tell us about, but we can go relatively quick.
Sounds good, Mr. Chairman. Thank you. Hey, very quickly, just a quick update from the military department. This morning, we had the honor to conduct the Wreaths Across America ceremony downstairs. Probably just as important with that was our opportunity to recognize our Gold Star families. So our Gold Star families are those that have lost loved ones in combat operations. So we had 6 families join us this year, and the governor hosts this event every year. And we hang an ornament in memory of each of those families and their loved ones on the Christmas tree inside the room down there. Last year we weren't able to do it in person, and we did it virtually. But this year we had 6 that show up, and then we probably put another, I don't know, 17 or 18 ornaments in memory of Wyoming Gold Stars to do that. So that was a great event this morning and well attended, and it was a nice event. I think it is important, holiday season is an opportunity for us to remember those that sacrificed and gave the ultimate sacrifice, and we were able to do that today. Sir, we have very few Wyoming Guardsmen deployed at the moment, really just 3 personnel on the Army side and 3 on the air side. They're kind of scattered out across the different areas of operation, but we will be deploying 2 UH-60 helicopters from the Army side with about 20 personnel this June. And I expect us to have a follow-on mission a year later with the same level of support, 2 UH-60s with about 20 personnel. I think many of you are tracking that we had support to hospitals starting about 3 months ago. At our peak, we had about 112 soldiers and airmen in about 20 different cities across the state. We slowly started to ramp that down as the COVID numbers have come down in the state. And starting the 1st of January, we'll be in just 2 cities in Cheyenne and Casper with about 10 personnel in each. Our intent is to have them on orders for, up till the 1st of April with the intent to surge if COVID numbers start to go up again. So we wanted to have sort of capacity and capability in place in case that happens. So we'll keep our fingers crossed. COVID, I can just talk to you very quickly about mandates. I think that's been the center of attention for a while. The Army Guard and the Air Guard have 2 different mandatory dates, as we talked, Representative Larson. The Air is supposed to have been completely vaccinated by the 2nd of December, and the Army has until the 30th of June to get that done. So we're working through that right now. We do have on the air side, they're about 90 to 92% vaccinated on the air side. We have about 50 to 60 personnel that are in the process of looking at either a religious exemption or a temporary medical exemption. And then we have somewhere in the neighborhood of 20 to folks that are right now currently hard nosed as that goes. So the actions that happen after that is that if an airman in this case refuses to be vaccinated, they're supposed to get transferred to the IRR, the Individual Ready Reserve, if they have a remaining service obligation. So if they signed up for 6 years and say they only served 4 of those years, if they say, hey, listen, I'm not going to get vaccinated, they go into the IRR. And that was a new strategy that we found out about last Thursday. So we're still frankly trying to look through that to see what the impact is. I did want to be clear, though, I do want our soldiers and airmen to be vaccinated. I think it is a readiness issue, but I also understand that there are some people that just can't get there. And if that's the case, then we'll probably have to part ways at some time, but we don't need to do that in any sort of a disgruntled manner. Right now, I know the governor and I are not interested in disciplining folks that leave. We don't need to give them any sort of discharge other than honorable, and certainly we don't need to give any letters of reprimand. That's our intent right now, and unless something changes, I think we'll continue to do that. Are there any questions there? I know we've had a couple of instances where folks have asked if that's all right.
Representative Larson.
Thank you, General Porter, and thank you for working to get that out. And so all of our guardsmen understand what their options are and the feedback on that, and particularly those that maybe for whatever reason elect not to. The feedback on that seems amenable, or?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Larson, it depends on the individual. I mean, some people are frankly, very upset that this is forced upon them. I think, my personal take is we are in the military, and that is our job to do. I mean, we are expected to do things that the average citizen is not, and most of them realize that, even though they sometimes can't get there. Yep. Thank you. Yes, sir. Mr. Chairman, just really quickly, then the last thing I would say on the military department is we did retire about 130 years worth of experience this last weekend. Brigadier General Brian Nesvik retired on Sunday. You may know him as in his other hats. Also, Colonel Dave Hervey retired, as well as Chief Parsons and Paul Parsons and Chief Franklin. So quite a bit of experience walked out the door this last weekend, but more power to them and doing well. Hey, sir, I think the last thing I would tell you is, I believe you're all tracking the governor's initiative to increase pay. I just wanted to quickly talk to you about what that means for the Wyoming Military Department. Where we see it mostly is in our firefighters and security personnel is the primary piece of that. As you might imagine, also our cadet team leaders up in Guernsey, they tend to be very difficult to recruit for the pay that we have. And lastly, our custodians and groundskeepers, those are the ones that are most important, that are very lacking, and we can't keep them, frankly, to tell you the truth. Our firefighters and security folks, though, there's a little different constraint on them too, because not only is the pay there, but they also must be members of the Wyoming Military Department. So there's 2 hoops that they have to jump through in order to be able to do that. So I just wanted to let you know that certainly we're supportive of that increase. We spend a lot of time training and retraining personnel. We're a great entry-level organization to train firefighters and security folks and then have them leave us. So anything we can do to help keep us in there, we would certainly appreciate that. Sir, I'm about ready to turn it over to Mr. Shope. Is there any questions before I do so?
Any questions from John? Thank you very much for your presentation.
Yeah, thank you, sir.
Appreciate your comments. Okay. Shope, please proceed.
Mr. Chairman, if there are no questions on preliminary information, I'd like to jump right into our first unit on page 23.
I think that's perfect.
This is our state affairs budget. This budget supports the execution of contracts and payments for our entire state requirements in the agency, as well as funds, maintenance and repair for all of our armories, all of our matched money that is required for those from the general fund. And the governor has recommended approval of the standard budget. Priority number 5 from this budget is for our Casper real property lease with state lands. And it's a request for $2,717. And the governor has recommended approval of this request. On page 24, priority number 6 is our state military affairs inventory database. This database is critical to us to interface the data that we have to keep for the federal government with what we require now to input into the state government. And of course, that is for risk management and all of the facility needs. And the ETS estimate for the refresh of this database that's about 5 years old is $26,000. And the governor has recommended approval of this exception request. Page 25, priority 11 is our HR consolidation. And this is moving 3 positions to A&I with a total amount of $572,000. And the governor's recommended approval of this exception.
Mr. Chairman.
Representative Walters.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just this similar question on this HR consolidation that we've had with all the other agencies. And that is, are these individuals still physically housed at your location? And then also, how has this consolidation improved your operation or been a detriment to your operation?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Walters, we do have 2 personnel still physically housed at the military department, and that was important for us. It was 3 personnel, but when they did the consolidation, we didn't get to keep the second one there. So far, it's worked well for us. One of the things that we're reaching out and walking through with A&I is a service level agreement so that we're very clear about how much services and what the time span is and what level of resources come with us. And they've been very amenable to do that. So I would say at this time, sir, I haven't seen any negative impacts, largely though, because those 2 personnel that are currently were in the agency before. So very little retraining, very little having to get them to spin up. I probably may have a different opinion if we were bringing somebody just right off the street, but so far it's been good for us. Doug, would you say anything different?
Mr. Chairman, the only negative point that I would say is I believe those 2 people have seen somewhat of an increase in responsibilities. And of course, with 3 people, I think we were adequately staffed. And of course, with the savings overall and transferring some of those higher level functions to other positions physically outside of our agency, I think everything is flowing acceptably.
Okay, please proceed. Representative Schwartz.
Just to be clear, HR only has purview over the 230 state employees?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Schwartz, that is correct. Only over the state employees. Mr. Chairman, page 29 is our education assistance program. And this, of course, provides tuition and fees for military members that want to further their education, for promotions, primarily for retention as well as recruitment. This is the governor's recommended approval of the standard budget, and we have an exception request here. We are currently short this biennium in the neighborhood of $398,000 or $400,000. We believe that shortage is going to be flat for the 23-24 biennium. And we are satisfying that need with CARES Act funding in the amount of $90,000. And we anticipate receiving ARPA funds in the amount of $298,000 to satisfy this biennium's requirements. And so, sir, our number 1 priority, as is our number 1 priority overall in the agency, and that's to fully staff our military. This request is for $400,000 in tuition and fees. And the governor has recommended approval of this request. Mr. Chairman, priority number 2 under the education assistance is similar to our inventory database. We have a 5-year-old, in fact, almost 6 years old on this program. And ETS has recommended an amount of $31,000 to refresh the front end of this software package. And The education database is a web-based program that is accessed by all of our institutions that receive these funds, as well as our military units for approvals, as well as the members can access it for their submissions. So it's a fully automated program. And as with any program, from time to time, we have to keep it current, otherwise it gets out of date and will become useless to us. And the governor has recommended approval of that request. Mr. Chairman, on page 34 is our Air National Guard budget. The governor has recommended approval of the standard budget, and he also has requested to put a footnote in our budget that we are able to B11 funds, excess funds that is appropriated for major maintenance into our standard maintenance account so that we can conduct routine maintenance that doesn't fall within the definition of the major maintenance account.
Go ahead.
What is that dollar amount?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Kinski, there is no dollar amount identified today, but we're at approximately $3 million in our major maintenance account that we are currently in the process of using for other projects, but there's about $3 million in that account now.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead.
Mr. Chairman?
Mr. Chairman, if you could just help me understand how is your routine maintenance not included in your budget is one question. And then I'm assuming your major maintenance is like the rest of state buildings based on square footage.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Larson, that's correct. We do have a robust maintenance budget for the state share of all of the facilities that we have in the state. But historically, we have requested increases to that account and have not received significant increases. We have received increases, but over the past 2 bienniums, the focus has been to push more of the requirements to the major maintenance appropriation so we don't have to ask for an increase to our operating budget.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I guess that seems to be a little contrary to logic to me. It seems like you'd want to take care of your routine major maintenance so you don't have major maintenance. Your major maintenance really ought to be somewhat predictable: a new roof, a new HVAC, a new, whatever that system is. And then when we pull out of, and you should be able to rat hole, if you will, your major maintenance to accommodate those major maintenance issues when they finally mature and are needed to be funded. So then when we start robbing for major maintenance to do regular maintenance, will you not find yourself short when you get to the new roof, the new whatever it is?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Larson, that is logical. However, we have all of our projects fully programmed, and we are not consistently executing all of those funds. We still have some funds in major maintenance. And so without asking for routine maintenance, we're able, under a footnote like this, as we have in the past, moved money from the major maintenance account to satisfy some of those routine maintenance needs.
Mr. Co-Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just following along on Representative Larson's comments, perhaps if you just gave us, if you could give us a log or a list of the unfunded maintenance issues that you're having, and maybe some indication of what the nature of the maintenance is. It seems to me that from your testimony, one of the conclusions you could draw is that we're underfunding regular maintenance and overfunding major maintenance. And to help us understand where we're at, the disconnect, if this is cyclical, if it's going to come back into more equilibrium, what we would expect. Just a little bit more information conversation about this. Ultimately, we want the operating budgets to reflect what it takes to operate, as opposed to have it funded somewhere else, and then down the road, all of a sudden, there comes a realization for those of us who hasn't been here that all of a sudden major maintenance is inadequate, but we just need to help our budgets reflect reality. So if you can give us some information and some specifics about the underfunding of the maintenance for regular maintenance program, I think that would be helpful to us to understand. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And following up on that request, maybe a list of total number of square feet owned, and then total of that, how much is state-owned that we would be applying our major maintenance dollars towards. And then maybe a number of buildings and the date in which those buildings were constructed, because I know we have authorized a significant amount of construction with federal dollars over the last several years to rebuild facilities for the military department around the state. However, in some cases, those new facilities are larger square footage footprints than the old ones. And while maybe more efficient to operate, still cost more overall to the state because they are a larger facility. And so just a little bit more in-depth information on that would be good.
Okay, keep loading on. Here we go. Representative Larson.
Mr. Chairman, I can't help myself. I just hope my wife was listening when he said I said something logical. She'll disagree, but it really made me feel good.
And of course, Mr. Chairman, this request is for the Air National Guard, which is located here in Cheyenne. And then the same recommendation from the governor is also on our Army Guard budget that we'll.
Yeah, so I think what we're requesting is information on both. Okay.
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
All right, please proceed.
Page 35, Mr. Chairman, the Air National Guard is priority number 4. And this is a request to put a footnote into the budget that we have the identical footnote that we've had the past 2 bienniums to allow us to access the statute that allows us to create positions that are 100% federally reimbursed when we have those funds to create them and to eliminate them.
Could we use some of that major maintenance money to do that? Go ahead.
Well, sir, I don't want to cross general funds and federal funds, but I would be more than happy to if you'd let me. Mr. Chairman, and so this request for the Air National Guard is focused on 9 positions, and we currently have 4 positions that we've created and filled. And of course, if you want to see the 4 positions, you could go to page 19 in our reports section. And it's just a list of the 4 positions that we have.
And what are the other 5 positions you want to add on?
Mr. Chairman, the balance of the positions are at the bottom of the narrative. And so they're firefighters, and office support specialists and security officers.
Okay, thank you.
And the governor has recommended approval of this. And of course, this is in his recommendation is pursuant to the 2020 Enrolled Act number 40, section 7, footnote number 1. And so it's a reoccurring request. Mr. Chairman, our next unit is on page 39, and this is our Starbase unit. And of course, our Starbase program here in Laramie County focuses here in Laramie County on our 5th grade students, providing them the STEM education, science, technology, engineering, and math, and for a 22.5-hour program. And that has been somewhat limited due to COVID over the past year. But the governor has recommended approval of the standard budget, and we have no exceptions in that unit.
Representative Larson.
You know, the rest of us around the state get a little jealous when we see these kind of things. My question just is, have you ever considered taking that program maybe once in a while on the road to a different town and provide opportunities for the other states of Wyoming to have that?
Mr. Chairman, Representative, yes, sir. There's always been some discussion about either having mobile classrooms or establishing in other places, but even the star-based budgets have not increased significantly for us to do that. So it's been a plan on the back burner, but we simply haven't been able to execute it based on money. It's completely federally funded, and so we haven't been able to execute it.
Oh, Mr. Chairman. So General, what would it take what you got and craft a program that fits within the budget? No?
Hey, sir, Mr. Chairman, Representative Larson, I will take a look at it. We tend to be focused on Title I schools here in Cheyenne to get that done. And I don't know that I've ever tried to subdivide it any more than that to take it further out, but I can certainly take a look at that, sir.
I think it's good for other parts of the state to have exposure to our Air Guard, and you guys are great examples. And I think that, no, you are. And,
yes, sir.
And the rest of the state just doesn't get the exposure that the folks around here do.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, yes, sir. You're exactly
And we have, I'd be interested, and maybe we can visit later about that. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Well, I think we've had that conversation in the past.
Mhm.
And then I think one of the questions that came up with, where else do you do this around the United States? How large is the program? Are they mobile? Is that a footprint that you can follow, or if it exists? So it'd be useful to understand it a little bit.
And Mr. Chairman, as a follow-up to Representative Larson's inquiry, we did make a significant push about 10 years ago to stand up a second program in Casper. But it was never funded at the federal level because they didn't have any expanded resources that they could create more programs.
Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead.
So I just think you guys are the masters of making use of what you have available. You really are. And I just have a hard time thinking that you couldn't adapt and make that a successful event at other places without any changes. I just really kind of excited about, some potential opportunities there.
Yes, sir.
Mr. Chairman, our next unit is on page 42. And this is our billeting fund. And basically our billeting fund is to operate a chargeable quarter similar to a hotel at Camp Guernsey in the Cantonment area. And we have multiple chargeable billets up there. And that's what this program supports. It's self-funded. The governor has recommended approval of the standard budget. And you can see the usage history of the program. And currently there's a balance of $318,000 in that account. And that rolls around. We have a light training during the wintertime and then heavy training during the summertime. That's when, the majority of those expenditures are made. Now, we do have a full-time staff, obviously, that uses a significant amount of that money. And there are no exception requests in this.
Okay, any questions on Living Fund 476? Please proceed.
Mr. Chairman, on page 46, the Army National Guard. And the governor has made a recommendation to fund that program, which is virtually all federal funds with the exception of 25% of one position in the amount of about $41,000, but the balance of the entire program is federal. And of course, the governor has recommended the same footnote as we previously discussed that we'll get you the information on. The next unit, sir, is, Mr. Chairman, is on page 47. And this is our exception request similar to the Air Guard request to put a footnote in our budget to allow us to create positions. And this is 13 positions, which is the same for the previous 2 biennium. And currently we have 2 positions created and filled. And again, the reference to those positions are on page 20. Mr. Chairman, the next request is on page 51, and this is our challenge program. And of course, I believe that most of you are familiar with our challenge program, and currently the budget is satisfactory to fund the throughput of youth that we currently have. And the governor has recommended approval of the standard budget, and there are no exception requests.
Okay, proceed.
Mr. Chairman, on page 55 is our Veterans Education Program, Unit 502. This is a fairly small budget of $230,000 for 1 employee and admin costs to review all of our institutions that receive GI Bill funds. And currently there is an average of about $4 million that comes into the state from one of the chapters that are a benefit to military members under the GI Bill. And basically all it does is approve those institutions to receive the funds. The governor has recommended approval of this federal budget, and there are no exception requests. Mr. Chairman, the next unit is on page 57. And this is our Veterans Commission. And the governor has recommended approval of the standard budget for our Veterans Commission. On page 58 is the Veterans Commission Expendable Trust Fund. And what we would be focused on in this unit, sir, is the expenditure unit 503. And this is for the small amount that we're projecting of $7,500 per year. The next unit we will get to when we get to the cemetery.
Can you give me just a little history on that trust fund? How was that created and when? And the intent?
So the intent is to receive funds donated for multiple uses, multiple in historically minor uses for veterans, for programs, for to put in memorials at different locations around the state, those kind of things. And again, that's just focusing on the Veterans Commission side of it. Now, within the same fund, we also use it for our cemetery. And again, I'll brief that when we get to the cemetery unit.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
And currently there is an amount of $285,000, but again, the majority of that is for the cemetery. The next unit on page 62 is our Veterans Museum. And this we've had quite a discussion on the Veterans Museum in the past. Of course, this is located at the airfield in Casper, and has primarily the museum was established because the artifact of the building itself needed to be displayed, but it is quite significantly more than that, and they tell the stories of veterans that have significant association with Wyoming. A lot of course, historically starting at World War II with that facility, but we tell the stories of veterans up till the present time. The governor's recommended approval of the standard budget. And what happened was we reduced this 50%, and it was, the legislature that had a desire to keep this facility operational. And so we've made significant interaction with the State Museum as we were directed to do. And now we're back asking to fund the program fully. And it's been broken up into 3 different requests. And so to start with, when we cut right at 50%, we cut 50% of the personnel costs for the 2 positions that we have. And priority number 7 on page 63 is to add back in the 172,000 for 50% of both of those positions. And the governor has recommended approval of this exception. And I would like to point out that this entire request, all 3 of these requests would be required whether we operated the program or whether the program went to the State Museum. But we believe that if we're going to fund and operate it from the veteran's standpoint, that it should remain within our agency. And because we can operate it somewhat differently than the State Museum would operate it. Priority number 8 on page 64 is the actual 50% of the operating costs of that museum, and that's $53,000. And then the following priority number 9 at the bottom of the page, of course, the governor has recommended approval of the operating budget as well. But the priority number 9 is for ETS funding for both the technology services and telecommunication services for the museum. And of course, that's one-time funding in the 400 series that we have to ask for every biennium. And it has increased a little bit because the actual costs to archive data from the airfield there back into our state network is fairly expensive. And the governor has recommended approval of this request as well. And of course, those numbers came from ETS. Mr. Chairman, the next unit is page 68. And this is our tag records division. And this is a small division that we have 2 employees and a part-time contractor. And the governor has recommended approval of that standard budget and the maintenance that the tag records section does is maintain military records of historical. One of the reasons, I mean, there are many reasons. Of course, the primary reason is so that we can ensure that military personnel have access to their historical records when they fail to or are reviewing their records and don't have complete records personally. And there are some other reasons as well, but our contractor is converting some of those electronically to be archived with the state. And but there are no exceptions to this unit. Mr. Chairman, the next unit on page 70 is our National Guard Museum. And this is our museum that is housed on Pershing here in Cheyenne. And the governor has recommended approval of the standard budget. And we do have priority number 10 is our ETS funding for telecommunications in the amount of $7,777. Mr. Chairman, our next unit is on page 74. And this is the Oregon Trail Veteran Cemetery. And of course, the unit operates the cemetery through the Veterans Commission up in Evansville by Casper. And at that site, we inter several different ways. We inter, and I will get to that, sir. At the end of the operating budget, I would like to discuss capital construction projects with you. And so the governor has recommended approval of the standard budget, and then you have the history of the trust fund down here. And that $280,000, we're projecting $100,000 in out years However, we don't put that in the appropriation. We do B11 that in, we have $20,000 in the budget. And so we'll increase that when we need to buy vaults. And so that's the historically primary use of these funds. These funds are expanded so that if we historically have had to put an exception request in for large equipment and those kind of things, where now we can use this fund to fund if we need a garden tractor to mow the lawn, so forth, we can use it out of these funds. And there are no exception requests in this unit. And Mr. Chairman, our final operating budget request or program is on page 79. And this is our training and non-emergent need mission. It has had many names over the history, but this amount is used by our joint forces to interface with the Office of Homeland Security, other state agencies, county and city emergency managers. And so these funds are used for training to coordinate any response efforts that we have in the state that would involve the military department. And there are no exceptions to this request.
Okay, any further questions on any of the agencies or divisions, districts we reviewed? Representative Schwartz.
Thank you. So there's one unit that's no longer in your budget, which is Civilian Air Patrol. I understand, I mean, I recall all the discussions. I'm just curious if you've had any feedback related to that cut. And I'll be honest, I have a couple of friends who are CAP and they're less than happy.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Schwartz, I think we are starting to feel the effects of that cut in terms of being able to respond to Civil Air Patrol. They're one of the primary folks that we use in search and rescue as it goes forward. If you recall, this all stemmed from a crash of a Civil Air Patrol airplane, probably now 20 years ago. Tim was about 20 years ago. As we looked at the results of that, it sort of became clear that one of the reasons contributing to the crash was a lack of training. So the state of Wyoming was gracious enough to provide some funding to increase some flight time for Civil Air Patrol. At the same time, they also used that to increase their maintenance and hangar time just to and be able to house their airplanes so they're a little bit more responsive. In the last cut, we did take the state support of that away. They still are, it's a federal program and are run federally, but there is no doubt that they have felt the effects of not having these extra funds. And it's probably something I will continue to gather some more information on, sir, so that I can come back to the legislature at some point and request to have those funds restored.
Go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Larson, I know there's some 172s, but I wouldn't, there's 6 left now in the state. But I wouldn't tell you which their aircraft is.
You looking for a plane? Okay, any further questions for the general or for anyone else?
Mr. Chairman, I would like to talk capital construction for a minute.
If you must, go ahead.
So on the 7th, when state construction was here, they briefed you on 2 $6 million barracks that we had requested. And the one item and they're identified in name by their year, 22 and 23. The 22 does not have a note on it that we need that approved upon signature so that approximately by March 15th, we can still salvage the construction year. The federal funds were approved October 1st of this year. And so we're just waiting for that appropriation to occur.
Don, would you make a note of that?
And With that, Mr. Chairman, we have 2 additional out-of-cycle requests. And these 2 requests are handouts to you and electronically to you. And these are also funded, waiting distribution of those funds to us pending our ability to sign a contract. And of course, I can't do that until we have an appropriation for them. And the first one is our Oregon Trail State Veterans Cemetery Expansion Project. And this project is $2.7 million for expanding the abilities at the cemetery. It adds 400 niches to the columbarium facility. It expands a interment plot where we do direct burials of cremains. We do not have that capacity currently. It installs a new memorial wall with a peace garden and walkway, and that is designed for those that either have burials or primarily cremations where the cremains would be someplace else distributed, but it would be a place to acknowledge the names of the loved ones that have been military members and passed on, but were not interred at our facility. And then it also adds 360 crypts. And the 360 crypts are similar to vaults, but they're pre-installed in a complete section of our existing lawn area. And it decreases the requirement for personnel time and maintenance to inter caskets. Since they're already installed, all we have to do is peel off the top layer, open up that crypt and install the casket. And so this is a real cost savings to us. These upgrades.
So is that one casket per crypt, or is it, help me understand, I'm just trying to visualize.
The base crypt is for one casket. However, they can still be doubled as we do in the balance for family members, for spouses.
Thank you.
And so the entire cemetery is 100% general funded, which historically has always been the requirement, but there would be no increase because of the savings on the crypts, as well as all of these developments are occurring within the existing developed area of the cemetery. We're not making the actual cemetery larger. There would be no increased maintenance costs for any of these installations, but it would still be 100% general fund requirement to maintain and operate the cemetery.
Mr. Chairman?
Go ahead.
So is this requested Oregon Trail, or those all federal funds, and we need to give you the authority to spend that for that?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Larson, yes, that is correct.
Thank you.
These are 100% reimbursed federal funds.
So I'm curious how this would not increase maintenance funds. Because you're having more buildings, so you'll have building maintenance versus grounds maintenance. I presume.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Nicholas, no, we already have a columbarium. All it is adding is more stone niches it has 4 bolts on it. It's relatively no more maintenance to that facility. The bases are already installed from our previous construction about 10 years ago. The opening up a new section in the existing lawn for interring the cremains is not substantially different. You're still going to mow the lawn and water the lawn. The new memorial wall, other than needing to clean the wall itself, that is not substantially increase the operating budget requirement or personnel requirements at all. And then installation of those 360 crypts is really going to save man hours to allow those limited number of personnel to do routine maintenance, lawn work, take care of the trees and shrubs, and general cleanliness of the facility. So there's really not a substantial increase in maintenance.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman.
Representative Kinner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm wondering if you could anticipate what the long-term effect might be on the Oregon Trail Cemetery of having a national cemetery here in the area.
Tim, did you want to talk, you address that?
Sure, Mr. Chairman, for the representative, we really don't think that the National Cemetery is going to have much impact on the interments at the Oregon Trail Cemetery. There's definitely enough requirement for both facilities. The National Cemetery is a 500 plot cemetery, and most of what they've interred was already queued up to be interred. So it hasn't affected what we were going to do at Oregon Trail.
Okay, thank you.
Please, Vice President.
Like 760 more, 300. So what's the life expectancy of this expansion based on?
Mr. Chairman.
your average? So where did you come up with the numbers that this was needed?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Hicks, in working with the VA, they tell us the numbers that they will fund to develop. The number of interments are approximately 200 per year. And so remember, we would still have some burials in vaults that we currently, until we fill up that section. We would have the crypts. We would have another section for direct burial of cremains. And then we would have the 400 niches to put urns in the columbarium.
So I thought I saw a reference that there were 6 per day. Well, that's not 200. Maybe I was reading from a different.
So, Mr. Chairman, so then on Senator Hicks' point, they tell you what your budget is and you just have to make that work.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Larson, they actually calculate the number of plots and the amount of columbarium space that we can improve the site to.
Right, but then you work with that budget.
And then we work with the budget that they basically, I mean, we work back and forth between our engineer office and their engineer office to come up with that program. And of course,
I just sounds like a good approach to 5th grade education.
We know where that was going.
Mr. Chairman, on this request, this is another one where we would ask that this be appropriated upon signature.
So Don, would you get that as well?
And of course, the intent.
One second. Go ahead, Don.
Mr. Chairman, I'm at a little bit of a loss. Are these requests that are not going through the State Building Commission and the governor's recommendation? They will not be part of a letter?
So, Mr. Chairman, that is our intent, to get on the agenda with 2 requests for the SBC meeting in January, and then pending the outcome of that meeting, then we would ask the governor to put them in a letter to the legislature before the session starts.
Well, and just to make sure it happens, if he doesn't do it or whatever happens, we can approve it and fund it if we choose to.
And then, Mr. Chairman, our 4th capital construction request, we were just funded this year on October 1st for a new administration building at our ammunition supply point. And the focus of this project, we have a multi-use building that for the past decade that we've used within the parameters of the ASP that are right next to the bunkers. And if for safety purposes, they want that admin building to be away from the bunkers. And so outside the fence, this is at our storage facility in Guernsey. And they funded $1,555,920 to build this 2,000 square foot admin building. that has administrative offices, latrines, a break room, and a customer reception area. So that the customers would be there before they would go in, and then we would reuse the existing building for maintenance of that facility, as well as equipment storage for the distribution of that ammunition when our customers come in. And Mr. Chairman, this is the same. We would need this approved upon signature as well.
Okay. Tom?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Would this be state-owned or federally owned in terms of who would be responsible for major
Mr.
maintenance and
Chairman,
routine maintenance?
Representative Walters, these are state-owned. This is a state-owned facility. And so as with most facilities at Camp Guernsey, we do have some federal actual Air Force that we've negotiated licenses with the Air Force base out here to build training facilities on our property. But all of the buildings that we use in the National Guard and allow other military units to use from outside Wyoming are all state facilities at Camp Guernsey.
So
And this is 100% federally reimbursed for all of its operations and maintenance.
And you have that fund that we talked about earlier from you received from the use of Guernsey for the barracks and that type of thing. Are there available funds here to help cover any costs?
Go
ahead.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Nicholas, no, there aren't. Our billeting fund is restricted to receiving like travel funds from the federal government for individuals that stay in those billets, and those funds are targeted specifically at those operating those chargeable quarters.
Okay. Further questions? Any more projects?
Mr. Chairman, no.
Okay.
And that concludes our briefing of both our operating.
Okay, it's 5:01. Good timing. Good military time. Please go ahead, General.
Hey, Mr. Chairman, I just want to make sure that I captured, I think we owe you a report on some maintenance, specifically routine, what's on the unfunded list, and provide information what's state and what's federal. Does that make sense?
Correct.
And then the second thing, to Representative Larson, I need to use a little more imagination with Starbase, and I'll come back on and get that squared away, sir. Cool.
Okay, thank you very much. Appreciate your presentation, your time and effort, and your service to the state of Wyoming and America. Thank you very much. You bet. Okay, Don, why don't you walk us through while they're packing up? Why don't you walk us through tomorrow?
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, primarily the agencies before you relate to higher education, commencing with the Community College Commission, and a number of the college presidents will be participating via Zoom tomorrow. Approximately after the morning break, UW will appear. In the middle of their presentation, the School of Energy Resources will present their budget. That's typical of JAC action in the past, but recall the Minerals Committee passed a bill last year which separates the budgeting for SCR with the budgeting for the University of Wyoming. And then in the afternoon, there's a two-part presentation for the Department of Transportation. You have their agency budget, Agency 45, in with all of the other documents. In addition, in the pre-session folder, there is their full commission budget, which is federal funds, as well as a commission presentation for PowerPoint that includes a discussion of all of the funds available to the department that are not approved by the legislature. And then the day concludes with the Board of Parole.
Okay, any further business for the day? Well, look who's here. It's just snuck in. That's co-chair. I must have been sleeping.
I saw him this morning and I saw him in his office with certificates in his head. And then when I tuned in this afternoon, he was in his chair.
All right, I think that's